Chapter 979. Damn thing, he still hasn't said a single word. You guys are the worst mercenaries I've ever seen. You guys are the most useless interrogators I've ever seen. Someone yelled angrily in English. It was already the third day, and his patience was running out. He was about to explode at any moment. The man with a beard that reached his chest looked at the government official who was yelling angrily at him. A hint of viciousness flashed in his eyes. Oh, so it seems that your government has a way. Then, sir, I'll hand him over to you. The man was wearing a white robe and white wide-legged pants. His facial features were Central Asian. He just raised his hand, and a few mercenaries wearing desert camouflage bulletproof vests walked over. They were tall and strong, and all of them were holding AK-47 assault rifles and standing behind the man. When the government official saw them, he immediately took a step back and looked at the high-ranking ST mercenary warily. With a serious face, he said, "No, we don't need him. We just need to ask which country he's from. Sacra, that's all we need to know. That's all. I know. I've been working hard. But sometimes, we can't get what you want just by working hard." Sacra was still able to smile as he spoke. He pointed at the captive behind the closed iron door. "See, sir. It's hard for him to even open his eyes now, let alone talk. His wounds aren't treated." "Oh, yes, you're not allowed to treat his wounds. Of course, we're all in favor of making him suffer a little. But now, he doesn't even have the strength to speak. How do we know which country he's from? Judging from his skin color, hair color, and eye color, we think he's Asian. That's all we know." Sacra's words made the government official squint his eyes. After a while, he smiled coldly. "Trust me, I'll find a way to make him talk." He waved his hand and ordered his personal guard. The viciousness in Sacra's eyes deepened. After the government's personal guard left, he sneered. "Since you want to interrogate him personally, I think we can collect our commission in advance." When the commission was mentioned, the government official immediately laughed. "Sacra, with our cooperation, I don't think we're in a hurry. Right now. Please wait a moment, we will soon hear that guy's voice." There was no need to consider anything when interrogating a captive, especially a captive who couldn't possibly return alive. As long as he got what he wanted, he would immediately end the captive. There was mistrust in their employment relationship, and their cooperative relationship was unstable. It seemed that it wasn't Sacra who had lost his patience, but the government who had lost their patience. 10 minutes later, footsteps were heard. Then, the locked iron door creaked open and 4 people came in. "Wake him up." When he saw the wound on K7's shoulder, a cruel smile appeared on his face. He lifted his leg and stepped on the wound with the heel of his leather shoe. Then, he twisted his ankle and let the heel of his shoe crush the wound. This wound had originally stopped bleeding, but after being crushed by the hard heel of the shoe, the bright red blood and the layer of scab were crushed into wisps of blood, revealing a bright red, ferocious wound. K7 did not move. It was as if he had lost consciousness, but his brows were furrowed. It was as if he was frowning in his sleep due to discomfort. Chapter 980. Did you see that, Sacra? I told you he would wake up soon. Wait, he will wake up soon. The dark-skinned, typical Middle Eastern man smiled viciously. With the cold-bloodedness of a soldier, he signaled his guard with his eyes, and K7 heard the sound of glass breaking. 2 minutes later, an unknown drug was injected into his arm. After the needle was pulled out for less than a minute, K7 opened his eyes like a wolf trapped in a bush. Pain, his whole body was in extreme pain. All of his wounds felt like they were being pricked by thousands of needles. It was so painful that the veins on K7's neck were bulging. It felt like his blood vessels were going to explode from his skin. They had injected an unknown drug into his body, causing the pain all over his body to increase by dozens of times, and the pain was amplified and amplified. That kind of pain wasn't enough to make K7 pass out. His wounds hurt, his bones hurt, and his organs hurt. Rapid breathing didn't lessen the pain. Instead, it increased the sensitivity of the pain. Some people said they were in so much pain that they didn't want to live anymore. Some people said they didn't want to live anymore. Some people said they didn't have a good day. What they said was just empty talk. The real pain wasn't to the point where you didn't want to live anymore. It was to the point where you couldn't fight back. You were in so much pain that your muscles were spasming. Sweat the size of beans kept dripping down into your wounds. Which country did you come from? Tell me, buddy. The officer used his leg to kick K7's bleeding shoulder. K7, who was lying on his side with his hands locked behind his back, was forced to lie on his back. That way, the officer could clearly see what happened to the man who was injected with the pain-increasing drug. Thanks to the pain, K7's tears washed away the blood in his eyes. Through the intense pain, K7 saw a ferocious East Asian face. K7 focused his gaze and quickly observed the other person's expression. His heart was in pain, but he had to stay awake to observe the other person's expression. If he wanted to live, he first needed to know what the other party wanted, how long he could endure, and whether he could kill him in a fit of rage, or if he could endure it for the time being. The man was in a hurry. It wasn't a hurry that came naturally. It was a hurry that was urged by someone. That was right. The man they beheaded was not a normal person. If they wanted to find out the truth, how could they let a captive go so easily? Very well, as long as he knew that the man wouldn't kill him now. After he used up all of his energy to stay awake, K7 growled like a trapped beast. His body couldn't help but twist. He stuck his tongue deep into his throat. He wanted to vomit. If you wanted to get information from him, you had to make sure he was still alive. The special forces from the Shuayu Brigade were invincible. They could return in triumph, or they could die without hesitation. They could face being captured calmly, and they could overcome their fear of death. To die for one's country was an honorable death. Fuck, bro. K7, smile for me. We've known each other for a year, and I've never seen you smile before. Fuck you, I even drank your saliva. Hello, I'm Q King. Nice to meet you. And my brothers. My brothers, was. Chapter 981. K7 forced himself to vomit until his tongue almost got cramps. Only then did he feel nauseous. He had developed a resistance to the drug, which could be seen from his vomiting. He was a forensic doctor, so he had to know what he needed to know. Since the other party couldn't do anything to him, then the real game had just begun. On the ground, K7, who was tied up in a bow shape, was convulsing violently. When he started to vomit from the pain, the military officer panicked. Quick, quick! Save him! He didn't despair anymore. As long as there was a chance of survival, he wouldn't despair. He wouldn't give up. As long as he could stand up, he wouldn't give up. But this thing was really fucking painful. The sandstorm was so strong that it was blinding. The sun outside was so bright that it made him dizzy. It took a total of 6 hours to travel from Ta County to the walk-in corridor. The Snowfield Brigade packed their luggage and took the supplies that the military asked the border guards to store in the Princess Castle, towards the iceberg. Since the military is providing the supplies, they should at least give me a gun. Z7 Han Zhang rummaged through his backpack. There were windproof and cold-resistant items in his backpack, but there were no weapons. He picked up 2 wooden sledges that could be used to ski on the iceberg. He wanted to say a few more words, but when he turned around, they were all gone. Fuck. They didn't wait for him. He put on his windproof hat and chased after his comrade who didn't even check what was in his backpack. Yi Qian caught up to Xia Jinyuan with the wooden sledge. I need to learn how to ski. I've never skied before. Okay, you only have 10 minutes. If you don't learn how to ski, grab the rope and I'll bring you down. Xia Jinyuan, who was using a compass to determine the direction, said faintly. He was wearing a windproof suit and standing in the snow. His figure didn't look bloated. He was still tall and straight. Yi Qian smiled. No, give me 10 minutes. Uncle Chin taught me the basics. It's a pity I didn't bring a sledge. Looks like you did learn a lot in the no man's land. Not bad, we can use all this. And it won't be just one time. My little fox is indeed knowledgeable. I haven't found anything you don't know yet. Xia Jinyuan smiled at her. The curve of his thin lips made Yi Qian look away. She didn't want to see him smile. After a few hours of driving, whenever he had time, he would kiss her and shamelessly say, relax. Relax. Was there anyone who could calm down and relax like him? Did he still need to calm down and relax? He's obviously being shameless. Yi Jian's reaction made Xia Jinyuan smile so much that the corners of his eyes turned soft. Silly girl, he was not joking when he said that he wanted to calm down and relax. He was indeed letting himself relax and suppress the irritation in his heart. He could easily tell G3 that since Yi Jian was here, he would accept it. But in his heart, how could he accept it instantly after such a strong objection? She still needed more time to grow. Would she be able to adapt to the sudden increase in danger of the entire mission? Was she enough to handle? One had to know that Yi Jian was truly fighting alone this time. After a few hours of settling down and seeing that she was calm and normal, he gradually suppressed the irritation in his heart and slowly relaxed. Follow closely. There are snow leopards in this area. Xia Jinyuan seemed to be very familiar with this area. He walked along the snowy road without stopping. He walked quickly and calmly. Along the way, they didn't see any snow leopards. Instead, they saw a few Marco Polo sheep jump and disappear. Chapter 982. Normally, they might even go hunting sheep, but at this moment, they were all focused on marching forward. There are no birds above, no beasts below. Everywhere is vast and unpredictable. Only the sun can guide the east and west, and human bones can guide the way. The journey described by F.A. Shi, a monk from the Eastern Jin dynasty, was now the journey of the Snowfield Brigade. Between heaven and earth, there were boundless snowy mountains. Walking at the foot of a snowy mountain, everything seemed small. Old Luo is here. Walking past a pile of weathered rocks, Xia Jinyuan saw 4 stones neatly placed. The smallest stone was facing the direction of an iceberg 6,000 meters above sea level. The person leading the way was very reliable. During the Civil War, Old Luo was the first to escape to China with his eldest son on the iceberg. When he went back to pick up his wife and 3 children, he took the iceberg again. When he escaped to China, he took the iceberg again. The 2 of them went back and forth once, a total of 4 times. He was the most familiar with this route. The 7 of them headed towards the iceberg like stowaways. The deeper they went, the deeper the snow became. When they reached the bottom of the slope, the 7 of them tied wooden sleds to their feet and rushed down the valley. Yi Qian was very slow at first. His upper body was relaxed, his center of gravity was forward, his knees were bent, his eyes were looking forward, and his ski poles were pointing outwards. He didn't even need Xia Jinyuan's guidance. After he went up, he started to paddle. Yi Qian was not proficient in paddling from top to bottom. With Xia Jinyuan escorting him, he was a few minutes later than the other members. Before he reached the bottom, he suddenly saw a few horses raising their front legs from time to time in the snow. Horses? How can there be horses? Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows. He, who had been at the back, took the lead and whizzed past her. With a beautiful turn, he stopped beside a nomad. This was their guide, Old Luo. Old Luo was Tajik. When he saw Xia Jinyuan, he immediately opened his arms warmly. He didn't look like an elder, but more like a brother. Without too many warm words, Old Luo looked at Yi Qian and pointed at the 7 horses he brought. If you had told me earlier, I would have prepared another horse. No need, this is good enough. Xia Jinyuan was pleasantly surprised by the fact that he had brought a horse that could travel on the ice mountain with him. The pigeons had already mounted their horses. Let's hurry up and set off before dawn. They had to travel at night tonight, but it was better to travel early in the morning than late at night. Past the snowy mountain at 6,000 meters above sea level was another country. At the end of October, the walk-in corridor was still quite sunny, and the bad weather had yet to arrive. From day to night, they stepped on the snow and braved the knife-like wind that could cut their faces as they persisted in entering the war zone. The ability of the special forces to withstand harsh conditions was not something that ordinary soldiers could imagine. They could stay on the snowy mountain for a year and a half, just like the locals. At night, the horses could not walk as well as they could during the day. They walked on gray stones that were not covered by snow, and their legs were numb from the cold. When their blood reached their hearts, it was still cold. The people could not rest, and neither could the horses. With the horses riding during the day, the whole day and night journey was shortened to no more than 20 hours. Yi Qian walked in the middle from the very beginning. At 4:00 in the morning, she was still walking in the middle. Her thighs were wrapped in Old Luo's fur jacket and tied with straps. She pulled one foot out of the snow and then the other, and walked like this for less than half an hour. Chapter 983. Half an hour of rest was because the horse was disobedient. The path they took was not the most difficult one. Old Luo had climbed the iceberg at night 4 times. He took off his gloves and put some snow into his mouth. His tongue was frozen stiff, but it also stimulated his brain to wake up. We'll be there if we go from here. At 7:00 in the morning, when there was a glimmer of light in the sky, Old Luo, who was standing halfway up the iceberg, laughed and said, "It's still the same path I took 4 years ago. The weather is very cold, and it didn't snow at night. Once it snowed at night, the march would only be slower due to the strong wind and heavy snow." Looking at the endless winding road below, Xia Jinyuan's dark eyes narrowed slightly. Rush down in one go, rush to the bottom of the mountain, and rest for an hour before we set off. They chose the most difficult path because they were all illegal mercenaries. Because they couldn't expose themselves and let the country they were protecting have a trace of stain. From 11:40 p.m. to 7:00 a.m., a full 20 hours passed through the iceberg 6,000 meters above sea level and arrived at their destination. Old Luo didn't go back immediately. He went to a Tajik house to rest. Except for Yi Qian, who just shook his hand and said, "Thank you," all the members of the Snowfield Brigade gave this 43-year-old brother a warm hug. 84 hours after K7 was captured, the members of the Snowfield Brigade changed into the local clothes of this war-torn country and drove a jeep to the desert. From the snow mountain to the desert, this was their journey of war. They arrived at Registan in the early morning of the 6th day after K7 was captured. The 7 of them couldn't be seen as human anymore. They were covered in yellow dust and a layer of dust could be seen in their hair. Registan, the arid plateau area in the southwest, was divided into deserts and sand ridges, and there was a desert plain in the middle. There was no vegetation and no rain. Yi Qian separated from the Snowfield Brigade at 4:00 in the morning on the sixth day. She jumped directly into a truck and entered the St. Mercenary Corps, leaving the Snowfield Brigade with a slender and fearless back. Yi Qian, she is a good soldier, Dove said softly. The dove spoke softly, as tears began to form at the corners of her eyes. This journey was filled with unpredictable dangers, yet she had chosen to leave without a trace of hesitation. His low voice fell into the ears of his comrades, and they all looked up at Xia Jinyuan, who was standing in the middle of them. "Why are you looking at me?" Xia Jinyuan retracted his gaze and a cold glint flashed across his eyes. His handsome face was cold as he quickly ordered, Z7, establish communication. Explosives personnel, prepare more explosives. G3, follow me to the market. The rest of you, stay alert. He was worried about Yi Qian, but he still needed to be one step behind Yi Qian to enter Saint. The sun had just risen, but the desert still seemed to be shrouded in darkness. There was no vibrant green, only endless desolation. Fine sand and dust were blown over by the wind. Yi Qian blinked slightly and raised her hand to rub her eyes that had gotten into the sand. She was now a local nomad in Helmand. Her family had sold her to the St. Mercenary Corps for money, and she had officially become the lowest member of the St. Mercenary Corps. She wore a white gauze dress and a headscarf of the same color. She held freshly baked naans and gave them to the mercenaries from different countries. It was the 10th hour of entering the St. Mercenary Corps. Yi Qian had already started her work at 5:00 that day. The low adobe house was much more square than the adobe house in Pakistan. In Yi Qian's eyes, it was like a cage. The entire St. Mercenary base was huge. When Yi Qian saw a few mercenaries dressed in miscellaneous military uniforms appear, the white gauze gently swept past and hid behind a mud house. She had to wait until it was completely dark before she could take action. Chapter 984. Holding the metal locator in his hand, Yi Qian rushed to the southwest corner as fast as he could. To ensure that they could safely rescue K7, the Snowfield Brigade marched 24 hours a day from the southern central province to this country that was in constant civil war. They crossed 5 provinces of this country and were the first to arrive in Helmand. 80% of the families in Helmand grew opium poppies. They smuggled the opium poppies out of the country to earn high profits, and most of the money was used to fund the local rebels. A portion of the money was given to the St. Mercenaries. In Helmand and Registan, the St. Mercenaries became the protection of some civilians and officials, but they also became the nightmare of the poor civilians. They only stayed in Helmand for 2 hours. T6, a member of the Snowfield Brigade, obtained information in fluent Farsi. He found out that the St. Mercenaries kept the criminals and disobedient local civilians in the southwest corner, and the executions were also carried out in the southwest corner. Now, Yi Qian only had one thing to do, and that was to hand the metal locator to K7. V8 and the others would then secretly rescue K7 based on his location. Xia Jinyuan would act alone like Yi Qian. He would create an explosion in ST to create a diversion so that Yi Qian could obtain the name list. Then, he would cover Pigeon and the others to rescue K7. They would not engage in a fight with the St. Mercenaries. Unless they were stupid enough to think that they were invincible, they would not do such a thing. To put it more elegantly, this operation was mainly about fishing in troubled waters as the vanguard, and then secretly crossing Chencang as the escape route, successfully rescuing K7. Using G3's vulgar words, they were doing something big in secret. The entire ST base was built with a mixture of ash, clay, and gravel. Every time Yi Qian lay down in a corner, her white gauze would be stained with a large amount of yellowish-brown dust. If she could, she wanted to roll in the dirt and turn her white body yellow. It was late at night, and wearing a white gauze that fluttered when the wind blew, it was too conspicuous. What's the situation? Is there any movement? 12 hours after Yi Qian entered ST base, the Snowfield Brigade established communications. The comrades on standby started exchanging information with each other. They were asking the T6 combatants closest to ST base. An hour ago, Z7 had set up a very small ultra-short-wave radio base station. Although it was small, the transmission signal was stable. It could even transmit images and data through infrared scanning. The location data of the metal positioning device had already been downloaded onto the portable computer purchased from the Hellman market. As long as Yi Qian found K7 and turned on the positioning device, they would immediately be able to pinpoint K7's exact location. There was no response from the radio waves. Z7 said in a low voice, "Nothing. Let's see if Q King is doing anything. He's in electromagnetic silence. We can't contact him for now." Electromagnetic silence meant that the connection with the radio waves was cut off. Xia Jinyuan was afraid that ST base had an electromagnetic interference system that would capture their radio waves. The operation had not yet begun, but they would be directly exposed. "You guys stay here. I'll go to the southwest corner to check out the situation." She's been in there for 12 hours, and it's been dark for 4 hours. Based on her efficiency, she should have found something. The T6 combatant did not keep watch in the front anymore. He slowly pulled himself out of a pile of sand and said after a while, "It's so cold." Burying himself in the sand, there was no cold wind blowing against his body to warm him up. The temperature difference between day and night was already very large, so when he came out of the sand, the cold wind scraped against his skin and seeped into his bones. The location of the ST Mercenary Regiment's base was not bad. In front of it was a desert, behind it was a mountain and a river, and further ahead was the desert of Registan. The ST base, which was built on a gravel hillside, had an excellent view of the front, back, left, and right. The sentries stood directly on the high walls and could see anyone coming in and out below. Of course, this would have to be done during the day. Chapter 985. At night, the power grid was destroyed. The ST mercenaries, who lacked power, could only rely on a few strong lights that had been charged during the day. Even the sentries were extremely undisciplined. This was their territory. Even the government forces had to be polite to them. So far, no one had launched a sneak attack on the base. The rebels did not dare, and neither did the government forces. In a country with the most chaotic internal enemies, the ST mercenary base had become the safest place. T6 bent down and ran straight towards the southwest corner. V8, who was in charge of ground observation, said softly, 20 meters away. 3 patrols, make way. A military base that's even more military than a military base. This is already the 3rd wave. No, there's something wrong. T6 bent down like a groundhog and crawled behind the sand pile. His whole body clung to the yellow sand and blended into the darkness. The 3 patrols were obviously dressed much more formally. They wore formal uniforms, but their guns were not as good as the other 2. After walking away, T6 shouted excitedly, "Great news! There are government forces guarding this place. Brothers, I'm afraid there's a big shot inside." It was indeed great news. If Q King encounters the government forces, he'll find a way to stir up trouble. Done, brothers. At present, we see a 10% chance of victory. Pigeon pressed his body tightly. He was also lying in the sand, motionless like a rattlesnake, waiting for its prey to pass by. The ST Mercenary Corps, the government forces, and the rebels were in a triangular relationship. The ST mercenaries would not interfere with the rebels for the sake of the government forces, nor would they interfere with the government forces for the sake of the rebels. It had become a delicate triangle in Registan. It seemed that the ST mercenaries had gained the trust of both sides, but in fact, no one could fully trust each other. If there was any movement, the government forces in the ST base, as well as the high-ranking official, would definitely suspect that the ST mercenaries were colluding with the rebels. This suspicion had always existed. And it was not just today. Xia Jinyuan knew about the news that was beneficial to the operation 10 minutes earlier than T6 and the others. He even saw the high-ranking official's face clearly. Now, he was at the place where the government soldiers were resting. The skilled and bold all-rounder was laying out the yellow stripe explosives. Yellow stripe explosive was a relatively safe type of explosive. It could withstand impact and friction, and the detonation point was a sudden explosion caused by heat. At the same time, the poisonous gas released would cause chronic poisoning. No matter what the situation was now, his brother had definitely suffered. Since he had suffered, he had to get some interest back. After everything was done, he turned on the communication device. His low voice suddenly reached everyone's ears. "I've finished the deployment. There are government soldiers inside. Place the yellow stripe explosives at the door where they sleep. What's the situation on your side? Have you received the location yet?" Z7 stared at the receiver and clenched his jaw. "No, T6 is scouting the southwest corner." Just as the low voice finished speaking, a small red dot suddenly flashed on the receiver that had been quiet all this time. "Holy shit, it's coming, it's coming. I'll locate him in 1 minute." Z7, who was wearing a piece of anti-cold cloth to hide himself in the dark, typed rapidly on the keyboard. T6, retreat. It's not in the southwest corner, but in the east. The T6 combatant immediately turned around and came back. Q King, it's about time. It's about time. Yi Qian threw the HKP-7M8 pistol he had brought over from China into the building through the window together with a dagger. She, who was lying prone on the roof, quietly retracted the dagger without alerting the guards. She lay prone on the roof of the bungalow and exhaled slightly before quickly leaving. Chapter 986. K7 wasn't in the southwest corner, he was in a medical room similar to Saint. If it wasn't for the secret code that connected to K7, she would have suspected that the person inside was K7. From the southwest corner to the east, it took them 2 hours to confirm K7's location. Now, it was up to Xia Jinyuan and the others. After Yi Qian gave K7 the necessities, she didn't stop for a second. Using her petite body, she nimbly rolled across the roof of the bungalow. The roof wasn't made of cement, it was made of pebbles and clay. As she rolled across the roof, the sharp pebbles made her skin hurt. After rolling to the edge of the roof, Yi Qian lightly patted the dust off the white gauze. She still needed to use the gauze as a disguise, so she couldn't take it off yet. She gripped the edge of the roof tightly and jumped down lightly. Like a cat, Yi Qian leaned against the wall as soon as she touched the ground. She only left after she confirmed that there were no patrols. There was no light in the room, so she couldn't confirm whether K7 was seriously injured or not. However, from the coughing that he transmitted to her, he was fine and could save himself. His cough was low and hoarse, like a broken tempered glass surface. It sounded fragmented and unstable. Just by listening to the sound, Yi Qian couldn't help but feel her heart tremble. Her breath was stuck in her throat, and she felt a dull pain in her chest. How could K7 be fine? The criminals in the southwest corner were all beaten to a pulp. They didn't even have a single piece of clothing to cover their bodies. Everyone's eyes were filled with despair. They had been tortured to the point that even death was a luxury. In such an environment, Case 7 was a captive who had just killed an important person. How could he be fine? How could he be fine? She sent in all the guns and daggers. Hopefully, Case 7 still had the ability to protect himself. After completing the first part of the rescue plan, Yi Qian avoided the 4 teams of patrolling mercenaries. Hearing the screams coming from the southwest corner, Yi Qian walked silently like a cat towards the most heavily guarded area. That was the location on the stolen list provided to her by the military. There were 3 floors in total, 2 above ground and 1 underground. She needed to enter the first underground floor to retrieve the list. However, whether the list was really in the first underground floor, the person who provided the information couldn't confirm it, and neither could the military. Regardless of whether it was true or not, she had to try. At night, the temperature in the desert dropped drastically. Yi Qian felt like she was back to the time when she trained in the desert with Principal Qin. The wind brought sand and dust, and her entire chest felt like it was covered in it. Yi Jian, who was leaning against the wall, was silently calculating the time in her heart. 20 minutes. Xia Jinyuan could only give her 20 minutes. 20 minutes to detonate the bomb, and she would take advantage of the chaos to enter the basement. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 3, 2, 1. Boom. Boom. Less than 200 meters away from the central area, there were continuous explosions. As the ground shook, the entire ST area was in chaos. In less than a minute, it was complete chaos. Damn it, who's there? Come out. Quick, there's something sneaking in. Alert, alert. Sharp whistles were heard. Countless mercenaries locked down the exits of the base. Rows of machine guns were set up. Whoever tried to rush out from the inside was shot to pieces. Not even a whole corpse was left. The smell of the explosives was terrible. As the wind blew, a large number of mercenaries were knocked down. Chapter 987. This type of explosive didn't have much lethality. Explosives Master V8 added a little more fuel to it, and the resulting chemical reaction caused the mercenaries who breathed in the smell of explosives to choke and cough. Their snot and tears flowed down their faces, and they couldn't even open their eyes. There wasn't a single person on the roof of the room that she needed to sneak into. When the explosion came, Yi Qian saw several mercenaries rushing into the room. They immediately found cover and set up their guns to lock down the surroundings. There were 4 soldiers on the roof and 4 below. She couldn't be sure how many soldiers were in the room. It wasn't easy to get the name list, and she only had half an hour at most. She rushed past several patrols and headed towards the central area where Yi Qian was. Xia Jinyuan couldn't let Yi Qian carry out another dangerous mission alone. With the support of the pigeons and the support of a mercenary in ST, he could free up his hands to help Yi Qian. Her military boots left footprints in the wind and sand, but the footprints were covered by the sand when she lifted her feet. She looked for a possible spot where Yi Qian could break in, but she didn't see him. Instead, she saw a mercenary on the roof flapping his hands as if trying to grab something. Yi Qian went up to the roof. What a bold fox. She actually wanted to break in from the roof. On the roof, she made a collar out of the silver wire and quickly and fiercely wrapped it around the neck of a mercenary. As she jumped down, a black-skinned mercenary didn't even have a chance to struggle. His hands flailed in the air, and his legs kicked a few times before his limbs drooped down and he stopped breathing. Letting go of silver wire, Yi Jian quickly caught his body before he fell to the ground. She held him firmly and slowly let him fall to the ground. She did it quietly and did not alert the other 3 mercenaries who were armed with guns. Xia Jinyuan stomped his feet, and his military boots stepped on the wall mixed with gravel. He quickly flipped onto the roof. Before he could touch her, he felt a sudden chill on his neck, scaring Xia Jinyuan into grabbing Yi Qian's wrist. The moment the silver thread tightened around his neck, Yi Qian was startled and quickly withdrew his strength. Xia Jinyuan. Yi Qian mouthed the words to express his fear. If she had pulled back just a little bit later, there would be 2 marks on his neck. The man who flipped himself over was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. He almost lost his life just now. What a fast move. Her hand strength was also very strong, and it was very easy for an adult man to lose their life. He gestured with his hands to the left and right, then pointed to the mercenaries in the west and south corners. He made a horizontal cut across his neck to express, "You take the left, I'll take the right, we'll take the west and south. In the middle, close the rope." Yi Qian gestured an OK sign, and the 2 of them flanked the mercenary from about the same distance. This time, Yi Qian didn't use the silver wire in her hand. If she wanted to strangle someone's neck within a second and make them lose the ability to resist, she would have to rely on external forces. At a time like this, it would be better to use a dagger to solve the problem. It would be faster. On the right, Xia Jinyuan's hands were around the man's neck. After the sound of bones breaking, in less than 2 seconds, he twisted the man's entire cervical vertebrae in a strange 180-degree angle. It was quite terrifying. Yi Qian forcefully withdrew his dagger from the back of the man's neck to his throat. The dagger had to grind against the cervical vertebrae before it could be pulled back. Chapter 988. To strike from this angle, one had to be fast and accurate. They had to cut through the nerves at the back of the neck and pierce through the throat. The trachea would also be cut in half. This kind of assassination was filled with blood, but there was no need for a second stab. It could be done in one go. Sensing danger, the mercenary who had been staring at the east corner turned his head. He saw that his comrade was still half-squatting in the west. Just as he was about to speak, Xia Jinyuan approached from the south. Like a ferocious beast that specialized in biting people's necks, he clamped down on the mercenary's neck at the fastest speed. Then, with a forceful twist, the 4 mercenaries on the rooftop were taken care of by the Chinese soldiers just like that. Were the Chinese soldiers weak? No, the Chinese soldiers were never weak. The members of the Snowfield Brigade weren't just special forces. They were specialized in anti-terrorism, decapitation, assassination, and other high-difficulty operations. This type of soldier was definitely not inferior to the special forces of the American Delta State. The generator below is generating electricity. I'll cut the wires. Bring this with you for communication. Xia Jinyuan's breathing quickened. He placed the infrared imaging device in Yi Qian's hands. Then, he took out a receiver and earplugs. He placed the receiver on her waist and placed the earplugs in her ears. Z7 made his own ultra-short-wave radio base warfare device. It can ensure that we can communicate normally. The Snowfield Brigade was filled with talented people. They could make simple wireless communications, explosives, and so on. As long as they had simple materials, they could establish communication. Yi Qian fastened the receiver and opened a channel. He pressed the earplugs with his hand and said something. Z7's voice came from the receiver. Work together with Q King. Finish the mission as soon as possible and come out. The pigeons have already gathered with K7. The STs are now searching for K7. Yi Qian, you and Q King should finish the mission as soon as possible and support them. The 2 of them looked at each other. Then, they picked up 2 submachine guns and entered from the rooftop. The wire cutters cut through the main wire, and then there was the sound of someone pulling the trigger. Yi Qian jumped up from the top of the stairs and approached the place where the smell was the thickest. Without the help of infrared and night vision goggles, Yi Qian could only rely on his own intuition and judgment of the source of the smell. He cooperated with Xia Jinyuan at the fastest speed and headed down to the basement. Yi Qian's combat ability was not inferior to a grown man's, and she also had the upper hand in terms of physical strength. However, she still had a shortcoming. Her strength still needed to be improved. If they fought head-on, they would win at the beginning, but they would definitely be at a disadvantage later on. She knew that as well, so she chose the most bloody and direct method of assassination. As time passed, Xia Jinyuan stood there like a guardian angel. He was waiting for Yi Qian to come out of the basement. Countless footsteps came from outside. Someone kicked open the door and shouted in Farsi, "Open the door, get out." Yi Qian did not come out. Xia Jinyuan did not move. He raised his submachine gun and aimed at the entrance. "Let's go." Yi Qian's voice came from behind. He said it clearly and hurriedly. Then, he ran up the wooden ladder and ran up to the rooftop. "Retreat, retreat. Everyone retreat." Xia Jinyuan, who was covering the rear, contacted everyone, including pigeons. "The location is there. Hurry." Pigeons carried K7 with one hand. The two of them hid in a corner of a bungalow and reported the location. She smiled at K7 and said, "Brother, you can't be a weakling now. Q King and Yi Qian are here to help us. If you came half a day later, I would have died. Sakura is fighting with the government forces. Damn it, I got the advantage, but you got the advantage." K7, who was running a high fever, opened his cracked lips and said coldly, "I didn't want to die here. Since I'm here, I want to go out with you." Chapter 989. Pigeon listened to his brother gritting his teeth behind his back and couldn't help but chuckle. "Brother, you're really lucky to have encountered ST and the government. I let you rest for a few days in vain." But a few figures flashed past his eyes. Pigeon shut his mouth and signaled K7 to hide. The running ST soldiers were all wearing military boots. Pigeon squinted his eyes in the dim light and smirked, "The government is here. Looks like we are going to have to fight, Saint Brother. Even if you want to sacrifice yourself, you won't have a chance." "When did I say I wanted to sacrifice myself?" K7 suppressed the itch in his throat and pressed his fist against his Adam's apple. He tried to suppress the itch that was about to come out of his throat. "Save my life, I still have a lot of things to do." Being willing to sacrifice yourself did not mean that you had to sacrifice yourself. The country did not raise you to be a soldier for you to think about sacrificing yourself all the time. Even if you were captured, as long as there was a slim chance of survival, you had to try your best to survive. K7 had never given up on him, but he had never thought about asking his comrades to come back either. Therefore, when he heard the familiar secret signal, his entire brain had a 3-second lapse in thought. It was all an ST. Why would he send a fake message? It was because he knew they had entered ST's base. He did not expect that after he sent the message, they would come back. That's what I call guts. If he really died, then our trip would have been for nothing. Pigeon signaled K7 to keep an eye on the window while he went to the door. Someone was coming their way, and they were flashing lights. The sound of footsteps passed by the door. Pigeon, who was hiding behind the door, let out a sigh of relief. That was close. The place they were hiding in was not a good place. There were a few dead bodies inside. The window was the best place to watch. Pigeon, whose alarm was lifted, returned to K7's side. Just as he took a breath, K7's cold voice came into his ears, how many of you are here? Including Xiao Yi, there are 7 of us. J5 had a bit of a bad back. His butt was injured, and his thigh ligament had to be stitched up 14 times. He insisted on coming over, but the brothers who stayed behind to take care of him knocked him out with a backhand chop. In the dark room, only his eyes seemed to emit a cold light. Never leave, never abandon, never give up. Brother, we have sworn an oath to the war flag. We are just short of swearing blood as an oath. K7 smiled. He finally smiled in the dark. It was not the kind of smile that came from the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. Never leave, never give up. Thank you, brother. No matter how rugged the road was, no matter how dangerous it was, and no matter how deep it was, he came with the determination of the peak of a snowy mountain. He was not afraid that he would die in another country. He came to his side just for the oath under the war flag. Thanks. A lifelong comrade in arms, thank you. Brothers for life. Pigeon turned his head and smiled at K7. His low voice was like a sun falling into a low and deep tone. What are you thanking me for? This is called following through life and death. Do you understand? If you really want to thank someone, you should thank Yi Qian properly after we get out of here. This little girl. Pigeon paused as if he was thinking about how to describe Yi Qian. After a while, he said, this little girl is not simple. What kind of words could he use to describe her? Even the most beautiful words couldn't describe it. No amount of words could express his appreciation for her. He could only use the simplest 3 words to express his thoughts. Chapter 990. Not simple. Everyone knew how complicated Yi Qian was. It was still a mess outside. The entire ST mercenary base was in a state of high alert. All the generators were turned on. As the generator roared, it started to spin faster and faster. The lights in the ST mercenary base did not come on as expected. It was still pitch black. 2 silhouettes stuck close to the base of the wall, stepping on the soundless footsteps as they jumped in through the window, landing on the ground and rolling in the air, sticking close to the wall. Yi Qian, be on guard. Xia Jinyuan did not even catch his breath when he came in. He immediately asked Yi Qian to be on guard while he hugged K7 who was panting heavily. He then put his hands on K7's shoulders and said in a low voice, "You gave us fake news. Go back and write the report for us." He was still alive. Even though he was injured, he was still alive. As long as he was alive, it didn't matter if he was injured. K7's mouth twitched. He was not used to it and wanted to force a smile. His chest heaved up and down as he said anxiously, "I had no choice. Later, when I wanted to send a text message, I smashed my phone into pieces. Trying to be brave." Pigeon chuckled and said to Xia Jinyuan, "How is it? Did you get in touch with them?" "I found them. Draw a map for me." Xia Jinyuan took out an extremely small flashlight. He turned on the red light and shone it on the ground. He then used a dagger to draw an escape route on the ground. G3, T6, and V8 will create chaos in the front. We will climb out from the back. There is a 90-degree slope at the back. It is 900 meters away from the exit. Yi Qian will cover the rear. I will attack. Pigeon will take care of K7's retreat. Xia Jinyuan turned off the flashlight and looked at K7's face. Can you walk on your own? I want to hear the truth. K7 opened his mouth and frowned. 900 meters is not a problem for now. Let Pigeon carry me. I will be a burden if I run on my own. I was injected with a strong nerve pain agent. There are some side effects, muscle weakness. Hearing this, the three people's faces darkened. Xia Jinyuan bit his cheek and said to Pigeon, "I'll leave it to you." "Okay, no problem." Pigeon nodded. In the darkness, her eyes were filled with murderous intent. "You too, be careful." The ST and the government forces did not trust each other at first, but an explosion directly shattered the fragile layer of trust. In addition, a government soldier said that he saw a mercenary in a military uniform leaving before the explosion. The two sides directly confronted each other with guns, and no one believed it. When Sakura found out that the captive he was holding had gone missing, the firepower of the entire scene escalated again. The T6 combatant who was mixed in with the government troops cursed in official Persian and fired a few shots in other directions. And when the high-ranking government officials who were still sitting in the room heard the gunshots, their expressions changed drastically. They took out their guns and pointed them at Sakura. This was the kind of scene that Xia Jinyuan and the others were happy to see. This was also why they said it was great news when they saw the government troops appear. How could it not be great news when a third party retreated while the two armies were in a confrontation? What's more, the Chinese side did not think of directly using firepower to fight ST head-on, nor did they think of becoming enemies with Saint. At least for now. Of course, the premise was that ST did not provoke the Chinese side. Chapter 991. The fight was a little fierce. Hearing the gunshots behind her, Yi Jian raised her hand and knocked down a mercenary who had rushed out and bumped into them. She covered the mercenary's mouth and nose and used the military dagger, Big White Lackey, she bought from the black market to cut the mercenary's aorta on his neck. Then, she cut into his vocal cords and moved the blade upwards. The struggling mercenary's body twitched violently. As Yi Jian withdrew the dagger, one of the obstacles was removed. "Keep up, Yi Qian." Xia Jinyuan's cold reminder came through the earpiece. He didn't want Yi Qian to fall too far behind them. He didn't want the four of them to split up and allow ST to take the lead. They saved one, but lost another. Yi Qian grunted softly and dragged the corpse in the middle of the road to a dark corner. His feet swept across the blood-stained ground and covered the blood stains with a thin layer of yellow sand. He didn't stop at all and chased after the pigeon that was protecting K7. "Dodge to the right. Dodge." Xia Jinyuan, who was in charge of assault and reconnaissance, saw a strong light coming from the corner. He rolled on the ground and hid behind a pile of protruding gravel. The pigeon was a bit slow with K7. It didn't jump or roll elegantly. 1 second before the strong light shone on it, it jumped into the darkness with K7. He didn't even know where he landed. "Move another 10 centimeters to the left, quick." Yi Qian's urgent voice came into their ears. Based on the maximum width of the strong light, the pigeon and K7 had to move another 10 centimeters to the left to avoid being hit by the light. K7 rolled on the ground, and the gravel hit his back and shoulders. There were multiple wounds on his body, but he didn't even make a sound. It was a group of 3 mercenaries. They were probably a patrol team. They rushed out from the back to support their comrade who was firing from the front. Their footsteps were hurried. The strong light swayed left and right and shone on K7 who was 1 step slower. Yi Qian was like a leopard, pouncing from the darkness. He grabbed the barrel of the K7 and twisted it violently. With the help of the pigeons, he knocked out the enemy's flashlight. All that could be heard was the sound of fighting coming from the dark corner. They shouted loudly, trying to attract the attention of their companions, but the sound of gunfire in front of them drowned out their shouts. Yi Qian stabbed a mercenary's inner thigh with his Big White Lackey military dagger. As the mercenary screamed in pain, Yi Qian quickly pulled back the hunting knife and used the full, sharp edge of the knife to cut the mercenary's thigh artery. Bang! Bang! 2 gunshots were heard. The pigeon that fired the gun shouted, "Take the K7 and leave." In front of them, Xia Jinyuan dragged 2 mercenaries to death. Yi Qian's eyes darkened. He said angrily, "I'll drag these 2 obstacles away. You take K7 and leave. Quick. Q King, speed up." If they were discovered by the patrolling mercenaries, they would be in danger. Xia Jinyuan's face was covered in blood. His eyes were bloodshot. He clamped a mercenary's neck with his legs and twisted it. He broke the mercenary's neck with the strength of his legs. After getting rid of the 2 mercenaries, he smiled in a low voice and said in a warm voice, "I've finished cleaning up here. There are still V8 and T6 fighters disguised as government soldiers and mercenaries behind. They will clean up for us while they are at it. So there's backup." Yi Qian was relieved. Pigeon helped K7 up. His heart was beating wildly. "Brother, we finally got out. Don't fucking die like this. Hang in there. Hang in there." Chapter 992. My throat is so dry that it's on fire. Don't make me talk all the time. K7, who had his arm on Pigeon's shoulder, spoke in a hoarse voice to show that he was still alive and wouldn't die so easily. 900 meters wasn't a long distance, but at this moment, it wasn't an ordinary distance. Alert, clearing, hiding, and avoiding. After countless encounters with the mercenaries, they finally reached the bottom of the wall where they could retreat. 1, 2, 3, jump. Xia Jinyuan half-squatted and placed his palms on his knees. He let Pigeon step on his palms first. As Pigeon rushed up, he raised his hands to help Pigeon jump onto the 5-meter-tall wall. K7 gritted his teeth so hard that the roots of his teeth were rusted. Suppressing his pain, he prepared to step on Xia Jinyuan's palms and jump onto the wall. "Sit on me." Xia Jinyuan supported himself on the wall with both hands. His tall and slender body was half-squatting as he gestured for K7 to sit on his shoulder. He would then send him up. "It wasn't easy to save your life. Don't give us a shock attack again." Yi Qian had been holding the assault rifle he snatched from Xia Jinyuan. When he heard countless footsteps in the sandstorm, his eyes turned sharp and he shouted, "Hurry." At the top of the wall, Pigeon caught K7's hand. His palm was so hot that it made his heart tremble. As the footsteps caught up, he hugged his comrade and fell down the wall. "Why are you so slow? Fuck, where are the others?" Z7, Han Zheng, and G3 worked together to catch the 2 falling people. Without waiting for anyone to appear at the top of the wall, they rolled down the 90-degree slope like a ball. Pigeon didn't forget to reply even after rolling down a mouthful of sand. "There are pursuers." Q King and Yi Qian didn't manage to escape in time. "Protect your base station well. Don't let the brothers inside lose contact." How did it feel to stuff a mouthful of sand into your mouth? If you ate too much, you wouldn't feel anything. Rolling down the slope, you wouldn't even have time to vomit. Yi Qian had also eaten a mouthful of sand. At this moment, she secretly used her tongue to clear the sand. The pursuers suddenly appeared. She pulled Xia Jinyuan and ran wildly. When she saw a cover, she didn't think much of it. She jumped into the pile of sand and ate a mouthful of it. No one knew where the pursuers had gone. After some noise came from the earpiece, V8 said, "Fuck, someone took advantage of the chaos to escape. T6 and I thought our identities had been exposed. How are you guys doing?" The message wasn't very good, and he couldn't hear it clearly. Xia Jinyuan crouched down and held his submachine gun. His eyes were cold in the dark, and when he looked ahead, his eyes were filled with hostility. Escape to your 11:00 left, 400 meters to your 10 o'clock. You guys retreat first and catch up with Pigeon and the others. Yi Qian and I will be there in 10 minutes. No, it's fine now. With a mouthful of sand stuck in her mouth, Yi Qian couldn't even speak properly. She felt pain in her mouth. The man beside her had been holding back his laughter. After the call ended, he turned to look at Yi Qian, who was still spitting out sand with her head lowered. He raised his eyebrows and leaned over to her, chuckling softly. Just drink some water. You don't have to work so hard. You brought water. Yi Qian looked up. It didn't feel good to have a mouthful of sand in her mouth. Without any light, Xia Jinyuan, who was surrounded by darkness, leaned closer. The tip of his handsome nose gently rubbed against her cheek. He lowered his voice and said steadily, "It's fine to drink some water." Yi Qian, whose lips were blocked, widened her eyes. This bastard. Drink some water. Drink the water in your mouth. Chapter 993. The kiss was very slow, and the soft tip of his tongue moved gently in her mouth. It was very delicate, and he did not let go of her upper and lower jaw. That's right, Major Xia's meaning was, drink, the water in your mouth can solve the problem. In order to be more flexible in battle, they didn't even bring a water bag, so how could they have water to drink? Be alert, little fox, this cleanup will take a long time, we have to take it slow. Xia Jinyuan raised his hand and wiped away the sand that came out of her mouth. The smile on his handsome face was somewhat sinister. After he finished speaking quickly, he didn't give Yi Qian any chance and lowered his head again. 5 minutes to clean up, 5 minutes to escape. You're in front, I'm at the back, be alert. At a time like this, Major Xia could still find an opportunity to take advantage of her. No wonder he was an all-round soldier. He could even take advantage of her as if it was natural. The first time, Yi Qian wasn't paying attention. The second time, she reacted and pushed his shoulder with her right hand that wasn't holding a gun. She widened her eyes and tried to push him back, but he caught her in his arms. One in front, one in the back. They kissed while being on alert. Even a special forces soldier in a relationship was so scary. 5 minutes later, there were only sporadic sounds of gunfire coming from the front. After they finished cleaning up, they calculated the time to end. A kiss in the blood. Xia Jinyuan, who was holding a gun with both hands, retracted his arms. His dark eyes that were looking straight behind him restrained the coldness in his vigilance. When he smiled at Yi Qian, the coldness dissipated slightly, revealing the gentleness that came after a tough battle. How is it? Did we clean up well? As soon as he let go, Yi Qian immediately squatted and held his gun to the back to be on alert. Hearing this, Yi Qian, who was blushing, pursed his lips and said, taking advantage of the situation. I think it's not bad. Xia Jinyuan wiped away the last bit of sand from the corner of his mouth, then bent over and stood up. The gentleness that he showed just now also disappeared when he stood up and bent over. On the battlefield, he adjusted his emotions in a second and said to Yi Qian behind him in a low voice, "Charge, you first, I'll follow." When he was with him, Yi Qian also felt that he could control his emotions freely. After 20 minutes of intense fighting, both sides refused to back down. Yi Qian stepped on Xia Jinyuan's knees and jumped onto the wall that was several meters high. The walls were high and the line of sight was far away. Lights began to come on in the pitch-black ST base. Yi Qian's pupils constricted as he said in a low voice, "Power is restored. Quick, Xia Jinyuan." The restoration of power meant that they had found the cut in the power line. Then, they would discover that there was a third party. Plus, K7 had rescued them. How could the leader of the ST mercenary group and the government officials not realize this? The only bright spot on the edge of the desert was the ST mercenary base. This base, which was claimed to be unbreakable, appeared to be in a mess tonight. The captives, whose identities were a mystery, had disappeared. After a cleanup, a total of 14 mercenaries were assassinated. Yi Qian rolled down the 90-degree vertical slope. She hugged the receiver tightly and rolled along with herself. She was afraid that the receiver would break and she would lose contact with Z7 and the others. Z7 and the others were waiting for the last two people to appear. When they heard voices in their earpieces, the few of them who had been tense all this time were overjoyed. They couldn't wait to ask, "Where are you?" She rolled down the slope until she couldn't tell north from south. Her head was still dizzy and she only knew that she was heading towards the river. At this time, it wasn't a river. It was just a dry riverbed. Chapter 994. Xia Jinyuan patted the dust off his face and supported Yi Qian, who was unsteady on his feet, with one hand. He glanced at the dry riverbed and said, "It's about 100 meters to the west. Don't move, we'll meet up with you soon." Before he could finish, Yi Qian bumped into Xia Jinyuan with his shoulder and shouted, "Get down! Get down!" The power on the high wall had been restored, and strong lights that could illuminate hundreds of meters shone down from above. The 90-degree vertical slope was not close to the sand surface, so the top was exposed. They had escaped with great difficulty, so how could they go back in again? The strong lights kept sweeping back and forth until the patrolling soldiers confirmed 3 times that they did not find anything. Only then did they retract the lights and shine them on the top of the base. "Give him an antibiotic and a fever reducer. Let's get the fever down first. Don't burn his brain." K7, whose brain was in a daze from the fever, sneered, "Q King, you didn't burn your brain when you had a high fever on the plateau. What's happening to me?" "Shut up." Xia Jinyuan broke the small glass bottle with his hand, took out a long and thin syringe, and took out the medicine. He handed it to Yi Qian and said, "You do it. His skin is thick, so you need to be careful." K7 looked at Yi Qian, who took the syringe, and the corners of his mouth twitched. His face was so thin that his facial features could no longer be seen clearly. He smiled and said, "Put it in his left arm." His body had been very tense. The neuralgia medicine not only made his muscles sore, but also made his muscles tense. Yi Qian did not refuse. He took the syringe and skillfully injected K7 with 2 needles. "Get in the car first. We can't stay here for long. When the higher-ups realize what's going on, this area will become a key search area." The syringe and medicine were prepared by the military. They were all powerful drugs, and the 2 needles would take effect in no time. After the 2 needles, Yi Qian felt K7's tense body slowly relax. He retracted his hand and clenched it gently. There was a sticky feeling in his palm. It was stained with K7's blood. He turned his head and whispered to Xia Jinyuan, "K7 is still bleeding. We have to leave as soon as possible. Let him catch his breath before we leave." Xia Jinyuan was not calm when he heard that his comrade was injured. Even his voice was a little tense when he answered. They finally met again after being held captive for 6 days. No one wanted such a thing to happen. Once it happened, they would do their best to rescue him, even if they were injured. Yi Qian tilted her head and looked at the man who had fallen silent. Then, she raised her hand and patted his shoulder gently. There was gentleness in her low voice. "It's over. Leave this place. Everything is over." Before she could withdraw her hand from his shoulder, it was held by the man whose shoulders were tense. His rough fingers gently caressed her hand. After a while, Xia Jinyuan said in a deep voice, "This is our profession. Little fox, look at your goal. The goal you are pursuing is sometimes more dangerous than this. I only hope that you can always hold my hand and never let go. No, I've never regretted what I've chosen, and I've never given up. Although it is dangerous, it is even more admirable." Yi Qian answered him. Just like before, she answered him softly, calmly, and with incomparable determination. Behind them, G3 touched K7's forehead. "Did you drink any water? You sound like smoke is coming out of your throat. You're not obsessed with cleanliness, are you? Did you refuse to drink water?" Chapter 995. I've only drunk 2 mouthfuls of water in 6 days. I don't even have the chance to commit the crime. K7's lips were dry and cracked. He gritted his teeth and said, "Did you bring a needle and thread? I'm afraid there are a lot of places on my body that need to be stitched up." Sakura was afraid that I'd die, so he removed all the shrapnel from my body. Damn it. He didn't even stitch me up. When the T6 combatant who was on guard heard that, he cursed and laughed. "Don't be too greedy. If you were an ST, you'd definitely be the first captive they'd give preferential treatment to." The group of 8 people moved forward by following the clues given to them from the inside and retreated towards a safe zone. "Which country are the mercenaries who contacted us from?" I was wondering why the military was so sure that K7 had entered St. So it turns out that there's a spy. I don't know which country they're from, but in a place like this that's no different from a terrorist base, there has to be someone from our own side. If something big happens, at least our country will know immediately. The dry and cold wind blew across the yellow sand, stirring up sand and covering the footsteps of the group of people. The dark figures who were walking towards the light in the darkness did not stop. They continued on their journey back to their country with their rescued comrades. Sunlight appeared at the end of the horizon again, illuminating this land that had been ravaged by war for decades. The golden sand was soaked in the blood and tears of countless people, and there was a sense of desolation and loneliness everywhere. Even though it was daybreak, it was still so desolate. Yi Qian, who had slept for 2 hours, opened her bloodshot eyes and stood on the sand dune. She quietly watched this devastated land usher in a new day. She opened her palms and let the morning breeze pass through her palms. Then she slowly closed her fingers. "What are you thinking about?" Xia Jinyuan's voice came from behind her. His military boots made a soft sound as he stepped on the sand. "Nothing. I just think that the sunrise here is very beautiful. Unfortunately, this land is always full of danger. Unknown danger, danger that the civilians are afraid of." Yi Qian did not turn around. She was wearing a white shirt and black trousers under the morning sun. Her androgynous outfit made it hard for people to immediately think that she was a girl. Xia Jinyuan stood side by side with her. After a short 2-hour sleep, his eyes were also bloodshot as he smiled and said, "Civil strife is the biggest problem, but we protect our country and its citizens. We can let them quietly enjoy the beauty of the sunrise and enjoy the time without gunpowder and war. This is what we have always insisted on. And one day, this land will return to peace. There will be someone to protect it, to keep the civilians away from fear, away from the smoke of war. That day will come." Yi Qian raised his head to look at the man who had a rigid jaw. He smiled and said, "Captain Xia, is that why you joined the martial arts world?" "I'm the same as you. I'm here for a goal." Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows and looked at the girl who was bathed in the sunlight. The gentle morning light shone on her dark eyes, making them as bright as stars. It also reflected the fearless persistence in her pupils. His dark eyes darkened slightly. He opened his arms and smiled gently. Come, let's hug. Hug yourself. I'll take a look at K7. Yi Qian did not have the guts to hug Xia Jinyuan when G3 and the others were around. Before he reached for her with a smile, she nimbly turned around and ran far away. K7's wounds were all treated. There were a total of 13 wounds on his body. Among them, there was a wound on his back that was about 20 centimeters deep from his shoulder blade. It was the most serious wound, and it was beginning to inflame and swell. At 4:00 in the morning, they entered Mirvis Hospital, a hospital built by the Chinese government in the 1970s. Chapter 996. Here, K7 received the best treatment. The doctors here were already used to treating people who were injured in the war. Furthermore, K7 was a tourist from China. The hospital hired the best doctors and used the best medicine. After 4 hours, all of K7's wounds were stitched up. The explosion-proof walls and barbed wire separated the hospital from the terrorists, allowing the 8 of them to temporarily escape from danger. This was also the place where the Taban terrorists had suddenly risen to power. It was the second largest city in the country. She would stay in the hospital for half a day. In the afternoon, she would take a flight back to China with K7. Xia Jinyuan watched her leave with a faint smile on his thin lips. He reached out his hand and mimicked Yi Qian's actions. He gently opened his hand as though he was grasping the sand from the Lazistan desert. Then, he slowly tightened his fingers. A trace of darkness flashed across his deep eyes. Just now, he was sure that Little Fox was thinking about something, but she didn't want to say it. What was she thinking? He thought about how she didn't notice that he had been standing behind her for at least 5 minutes. There was a trace of helplessness, sadness, and loneliness in her eyes. His heart couldn't help but tighten. It wasn't until he saw her straighten her back and exude a strong and indomitable aura that he smiled and spoke. What was Yi Qian thinking? She thought about it, but she didn't think about it. She just felt empty in her heart. It was as though she hadn't lived a fulfilling life in the past few years after her rebirth. She thought about the things she had done in the last few years of her previous life to counterattack Yi Jifan's family. Back then, the pace was much faster than it was now. Shuttling back and forth between the major cities of the southern province and the cities where Yi Jifan had worked before, collecting evidence bit by bit. In the last few years, her schedule was much tighter and more secretive than it was now. When she returned, she wanted to tell Principal Qin that she needed to arrange things more tightly. Compared to the civilians who had to find a way to survive in the war, she was too lucky and lived a comfortable life. He could do even more things and improve himself even faster. She didn't want to live up to the good times of her youth. She didn't want to live up to the good times. That was all Yi Qian had in mind. K7, who was lying on the bed, saw Yi Qian walk in. His pale face had a very faint smile. He raised his hand that was not connected to the drip. He could only wait for Yi Qian to come over and give him a high five. A crisp clap echoed in the room. K7, whose vocal cords were damaged, said with a raspy voice, "Thank you, my comrade. Thank you, my comrade in arms. You are my comrade in arms, a comrade in arms who will never leave or give up." "There's no need to thank me, my comrade," Yi Qian smiled warmly. "I don't think there's a need for thanks between comrades in arms. You were in the enemy camp, so it was normal for us to save you." V8 laughed. "Did you hear that? You're a man, yet you're not as broad-minded as a woman. I have to thank everyone who comes in. My teeth are aching." K7, who was being teased, looked up and swept his scalpel-like gaze across the room. V8, who was laughing with his head raised, suddenly stopped. K7, who was a forensic doctor and could dissect anything expressionlessly, had returned. Xia Jinyuan stood outside the room and laughed softly. This time, they could return to the country safely. The Chinese military had already received the news and told J5, who was lying in bed with a gloomy face every day. That day, when the nurse changed his bandages again, she finally saw the smile on J5's handsome face and felt a little flattered. Chapter 997. It took her 10 days to return to China, while Yi Qian took 11 days to return to Southern Province. After completing her mission, she signed the confidentiality agreement and returned to Southern Province. She didn't take a civilian plane back to Southern Province. Instead, she took a transport plane. Major Xia, who was sending her to the plane, pursed his lips. Are you sure you want to rush back to school this afternoon? You'll drive back to school when you arrive at the Southern Province Air Force Base. Yes. I've been away from school for so long. If I don't report back to school soon, I'm worried that the school will expel me. Yi Qian looked at him suspiciously as she walked towards the transport plane. I definitely have to go back to school. Why? Is there a problem? Xia Jinyuan looked at her and smiled helplessly. Why is it Wednesday today? If it's Saturday or Sunday, you can take a day off and rush back to school. They could at least rest today, but his little fox still had to run around all day. It was too tiring. Or you can have a good rest tonight and report back to school tomorrow. You don't have to rush back to school today. It's the same if you go tomorrow. Xia Jinyuan persuaded Yi Qian to skip class today and have a good rest. Yi Qian rubbed her forehead and sighed. Captain Xia, you once said that my main task now is to study hard and not to think about other things. I just want to study hard and not waste time on being wishy-washy. How many days have I skipped? 11 days. If I don't report back to school soon, I'm afraid I'll be expelled. Being expelled from school was indeed a serious matter. Xia Jinyuan went silent and sighed deeply. Studying is still more important. Call me when you arrive in Southern Province. Before he could finish his sentence, he stopped talking. He couldn't use the phone for half a month and was still under observation by the military. The transport plane was already on the runway. The wind caused by the propellers blew at Yi Qian and made a whining sound when she spoke. Xia Jinyuan did not hear what she said clearly, so he asked. She waved and smiled, then ran to the cabin door without looking back. After the cabin door closed, Xia Jinyuan could only watch as Yi Qian slowly disappeared from his sight. Yi Qian said, I'll wait for you to come back and put on your uniform. She still remembered this matter. She would wait for his return in the Southern Province and personally retrieve the military uniform that he had placed in her hands for safekeeping. After resting for a few hours on the transport plane, Yi Qian did not waste any time. She left the Air Force Base and drove the car she borrowed from Hozi to the provincial capital. At 5:00 in the afternoon, the first class of the province ended for the day. As soon as the bell rang, the whole campus became lively. Wearing a thin Yi Qian shirt, he took out his student ID and walked toward his dormitory under the watchful eyes of the guard. It was November, but she was still wearing a short-sleeved shirt. Walking on campus, she attracted a lot of attention. In addition, there were many people in the school who knew her. When they saw her wearing only a short-sleeved shirt, the first thing they asked was, "Where did you go? Wearing short sleeves. Aren't you afraid of the cold?" She had no clothes to wear. She could only wear the sports suit she changed into before going into the mountains with Xia Jinyuan that night. Her jacket was stained with blood, so she could only wear a short-sleeved shirt. She also did not have a school uniform. She had to ask the logistics department for a new one. Yang Heng was carrying a basketball to the field to play a few rounds before eating when he was reminded by his classmate that Yi Qian was walking over in a short-sleeved shirt. He stuffed the basketball into his classmates' arms and said, "You guys go ahead. I'll be back later." Chapter 998. As he ran, he took off his uniform and ran towards Yi Qian. "Why are you wearing a short-sleeved shirt? How's your family? Is everything okay?" Yi Qian looked at Yang Heng rushing towards him. He raised his head and smiled. "I was in a hurry to get back to school and didn't have time to change. I came back because everything was fine. It's already been 11 days. You took a long leave this time. It's good that everything is fine. It's only 11 degrees Celsius today. Don't you know to bring a jacket?" Yang Heng picked up his uniform and put it over her shoulders. "Put it on and go back to the dorm. Don't catch a cold." Yi Qian wouldn't wear his jacket. He quickly raised his hand to stop him. "I'm not cold. I ran all the way here. My back is still warm." Under the camphor tree, someone's gaze fell on them. When she saw Yang Heng draping his jacket over Yi Qian, Yao Jing's calm eyes flashed with resentment. She secretly clenched her fists. Jing, why do you have to do this?" Wang Dandan looked away and used her body to block Yao Jing's view. She frowned and said, "Look at yourself. What have you been doing for the past 10 days? If Yang Heng and Yi Qian are close, then so be it. Why are you thinking the worst?" Lu Mei on the other side also whispered, "Yeah, Jing. Don't think too much. Yang Heng has known you for more than 10 years. Yi Qian has only known you for a few days. Look, you all know that I've known him for more than 10 years. Yi Qian has only known him for a few days." But Yao Jing looked away and lowered her head. Her voice was so soft that it was strange, but on his birthday, he said I was disgusting. He said I made him feel disgusted. This sentence made Wang Dandan and Lu Mei's expressions change. They didn't know about this. After Yao Jing finished speaking, she raised her head and said to her friends, "Do you think I'm inferior to Yi Qian? Am I that disgusting? Am I that disgusting?" Her expression was not only a little strange. She was clearly smiling, but her smile was filled with coldness, making Wang Dandan and Lu Mei's hearts thump fiercely, and a layer of goosebumps appeared on their backs. Something was wrong with Yao Jing. Her smile, it's too scary. "Jing, don't be like this." Wang Dandan, who was braver, pulled her sleeves and resisted the goosebumps. She calmly said, "Let's go eat. What's there to look at?" Wang Dandan quickly turned her head and saw that Yi Qian was still wearing a short-sleeved shirt, while Yang Heng was chatting with the boys he usually played basketball with as he walked towards Chaoyang. Wang Dandan immediately said, "Look, nothing happened at all. Yi Qian didn't take his shirt to wear." Yao Jing stared at Yi Qian's back and then stared at Yang Heng. He said, "I'm disgusting. I want to ask him if I'm really that disgusting in his heart." "Why do you have to ask?" He might have said it in a fit of anger. Wang Dandan was a little anxious. Should I call Auntie Yao? Something was wrong with Yao Jing. But she couldn't tell what was wrong. After standing for a while, Yao Jing took the initiative to go to the cafeteria to eat. "Let's go eat first. I'm a little hungry." She wanted to do something big. In front of Yang Heng, in front of Yi Qian, she wanted to ask him if she was really disgusting. If she didn't ask, she wouldn't be satisfied. She wouldn't be satisfied. She wouldn't be satisfied that the person she liked said she was disgusting in front of the person she hated. "Yang Heng, I'll give you one more chance. You must seize it. Otherwise, you'll never have peace in this lifetime." Chapter 999. Yao Jing's reaction made Wang Dandan feel that something was amiss. She looked at Yao Jing's cold smile and knew that Yao Jing liked to twist her fingers every time she wanted to do something. Wang Dandan felt her heartbeat quicken. She had to call Uncle Yao and remind Yongheng. As for Yi Qian, Wang Dandan hesitated. If she told Yi Qian, wouldn't she be letting Yao Jing down? But if she didn't say anything, her intuition told her that Yao Jing was up to something big, and it wasn't something ordinary. Yongheng's words had provoked Yao Jing into acting so abnormally. However, seeing how Yi Jian's face had darkened after talking to Yongheng. With Yao Jing's temperament, it was not impossible for her to make trouble for everyone. Le May saw that her friend didn't catch up, so she turned around and smiled. Dandan, what are you looking at? Let's go. The wind blew. Wang Dandan put both of them in the pockets of her uniform and ran to catch up. Forget it, it shouldn't be a problem. The midterm exams were coming up. Jing Jing said that she would do better this time, so she wouldn't cause trouble. At the end of October, the weather changed and the temperature dropped sharply. During military training, it was so hot that they had to wear short sleeves, but at the end of the month, they could wear jackets. Those with weaker physiques even had to wear a thin singlet. Yi Qian came back just as the weather changed. The temperature dropped especially fast. The boys all wore jackets to resist the cold, but she came back in short sleeves. She didn't know how many stares she received from the school gate before she returned to the dormitory. And Jessin, who was about to go to the canteen to get food, saw Yi Qian and widened her eyes. She rubbed her eyes and shouted, "Aw!" She threw herself at Yi Qian. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it turns out they weren't. 11 days, you took 11 days off. Jane Eyre, you're so brave. You took 11 days off. I'm so envious. I want to take leave and go back to Fujian town too. Not only was Jessin envious, but everyone who was a little nervous about the exams was also envious. Especially when Teacher Tong said that she might take part in the midterm exams. All the students in Grade 2 Class 1, including those with good grades, were envious. When they were students, there was only one thing that most students wanted to avoid: exams. Yi Qian smiled as he steadied her. He raised his eyebrows and said, "You're considering it on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. It seems like you're not fully prepared. Oh my God, you're still thinking about the exam when you're home." No, it's not that I didn't prepare enough, it's that the few golden flowers in our dormitory didn't prepare enough. And Jessin smiled and turned sideways. She saw Yang Yi, Li Qian, Lu Lizhen, and Zhang Yuan on the upper bunk of Yi Qian. The 4 beautiful girls were all looking at her eagerly, like puppies that were about to be fed. Their gazes were so pitiful. Yang Yi wiped the corners of his eyes and said with a miserable expression, "Jane Eyre, we heard that your house collapsed and you had to go home for half a month. Everyone wanted to go home with you. Is everything okay at home? Has the house been repaired?" The students in the class all knew that Yi Qian came from the countryside. They didn't think much of it until Teacher Tong mentioned that Yi Qian's house collapsed due to the storm. Only then did they remember that Yi Qian, the absolute #1 genius, was from the countryside and not the city. In 1997, there was still a certain difference between the urban and rural households. Some people in the city even looked down on the villagers. This phenomenon existed everywhere, even in the 20th century. Chapter 1000. Meng Wen, who had always been secretly competing with Yi Qian, sneered, "Yi Qian's house collapsed because of a rainstorm. How poor is his family? No wonder he studies so hard. If he doesn't study hard, he'll be cooped up in the countryside for the rest of his life." Meng Wen's cold words carried the arrogance of a city resident. In the end, she added, "Luckily, I live on the 5th floor, so I'm not afraid of a rainstorm. Meng Wen only sneered to herself. If she really said it out loud, her classmates wouldn't do it. Yi Qian opened the closet and put the bag containing Xia Jinyuan's military uniform in the innermost part. Then he put his few clothes outside. When he closed the closet door, his gaze paused for a moment before he closed it again. Xia Jinyuan, your military uniform is here. I'll wait for the day you come back. Yi Qian, who was wearing a jacket, smiled and answered Yang Yi, everything's fine. As he put on his clothes, he looked at the pitiful golden flowers and said, You want to study at night, right? Sure. I haven't been in class for 11 days, so I have to study at night. But I can't study from Friday afternoon to Sunday. You have to study on your own. You don't have to go to the training base for the next few days. You took 11 days off, and you don't have to study at night when you return to school. It's really not appropriate. At least wait until the midterm exam results are out. You should hurry back to school and rest in the dorm. I'll bring you food. And Jessen, who was also from Fujian town, knew that it would take more than 10 hours to travel from town to the provincial capital. As a good friend, she was more considerate than Yang Yi. Yi Qian didn't refuse. He was indeed a little tired. He hadn't rested much since returning to China. She stayed by K7's side the whole time. Xia Jinyuan, Pigeon, and the others were vigilant all the way back to China. They didn't even close their eyes. When Jessen brought the food down, she saw that Yi Qian was already asleep. Upon closer inspection, she could see that there was a layer of dark circles under her white eyes. Shoo, lower your voice, lower your voice. She's asleep. She hurriedly gestured for Yang Yi and the others to lower their voices and said, Let's go to the dormitory next door to eat. You guys go first, I'll warm up her food with hot water. Now that it was winter, the girls liked to go back to the dormitory to eat. And Jessen and the others were about to go to the dormitory next door to eat when 3 girls from the dormitory next door walked towards them with lunch boxes. They bumped into each other at the door. Before the girl in front could say anything, and Jessen said softly, Yi Qian is asleep. Let's go to your dormitory for dinner. Asleep? All right then. Even if you're going to sleep, you still have to eat. Are you going to sleep on an empty stomach? I'll heat it up with boiling water. When she wakes up, she'll still be able to eat hot food. Even outside, and Jessen was still suppressing her voice. She then asked Li Qian, who was the last to come out, Is the door closed? Li Qian turned to take a look. It's off, it's off. Go over quickly. It's so cold. The temperature seems to have dropped again. The group of girls chuckled and went to the dormitory next door. Sophomore class 1 was an important class. The girls stayed in 3 dormitories, and each dormitory only had 6 people. It was unlike the humanities class, where each dormitory had 10 students in more than 4 dormitories. Meng Wen returned to the dormitory with the other 3 students. When he saw that Jessen and the rest were all there, he couldn't help but smile. Isn't Yi Qian back? Why aren't you guys accompanying her? The girls all knew that Meng Wen secretly liked to compete with Yi Qian, but it was all for the sake of his studies. Usually, there was nothing much between them, and he wasn't like Yi Ying, who was always picky. Hence, they didn't think much of it. Chapter 1001. And Jessen said disapprovingly, She's resting because she's tired from the ride, so we came over to eat. Didn't you come over to ask me when Yi Qian would be back and ask her to help you solve the questions? TSK, you can ask her tonight. It would have been better if she hadn't mentioned it, but the moment she did, Meng Wen's expression changed. She said angrily, Didn't you say she might not even take the midterms? Why did she come back early? Yeah, I said she might, but I didn't say she might. And Jessin stuffed a mouthful of rice into her mouth and didn't notice that something was wrong with Meng Wen's expression. I think she's quite tired. I'm afraid she didn't rest well at home because she had to rush back for the exam. Meng Wen's expression became even more unhappy when she heard that. There was a hint of disappointment and resentment. Is it necessary? Is there a need to rush back to school for an exam? Doesn't she need to rest? If she's so tired that she sleeps as soon as she gets back to school, she might as well rest at home for a few days before coming back. What's the difference between resting at home and resting at school? If she rested for a few days and came back on the day of the midterms, wouldn't she? And Jessin answered her. As she spoke, she seemed to have thought of something and stared at Meng Wen. Her eyes looked Meng Wen up and down, and after a while, she let out a long, oh, 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 oh. Meng Wen, who felt uncomfortable under her stare, harumphed. Oh what? You're so weird. And Jessin chuckled. Oh you, oh me, Meng Wen, you're really so cute that I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Ha ha ha, now I understand why you've been coming to the dorm every 2 or 3 days to ask me when Jane Eyre is on leave and if she'll be back in time for the midterms. I couldn't tell that you had so many little schemes in your mind. Ha ha ha, Meng Wen, your thoughts aren't right. You've wasted a week of military training. Yang Yi and the others were confused when they heard Jessin's words. They didn't understand what was going on, but Meng Wen, who knew, blushed and glared. Don't talk nonsense. I didn't think that. What do you mean you didn't think that? What are you two talking about? We don't understand. Isn't it normal to ask when Yi Qian will be back for the midterm exams? Jessin, what do you want to say? I don't have anything to say. You can ask Meng Wen and her. And Jessin didn't expose Meng Wen's thoughts. She knew her limits now. She knew that some things were best kept to herself. There was no need to let everyone know to avoid embarrassing others. This was a kind of growth unknowingly. He knew that he had to make things easier for others at certain times. He understood that he should not be calculative, and he learned to be tolerant and magnanimous. When Meng Wen saw that Jessin didn't say anything, she naturally heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. When she saw the other students continue to ask, she wanted to take the lunchbox to the dormitory next door to eat. However, she was afraid that Jessin would say something after she left, so she sat alone in a corner and sulked. This midterm exam was very important. It was very likely that it would be used as a reference for the direct enrollment of key universities. If Yi Qian was so good, why would he need to compete with his classmates for a spot in the direct enrollment? Even if her midterm results were 0, it would not affect her admission to a key university. Meng Wen, who was scheming in her heart, pursed her lips tightly. Even eating was a little robotic. Seeing her like this, Jessin laughed in her heart. She didn't want Yi Qian to return to school for the midterm exams. Chapter 1002. Meng Wen was normally normal, but when it came to exams, he would start acting weird. He kept trying to compete with Yi Qian, but it had been almost 2 months since school started, and he always lagged behind Yi Qian in mock exams. His grades were good enough, but he insisted on competing with Yi Qian. Why bother? Jessin didn't tell the other girls about Meng Wen's thoughts, but she would definitely tell Yi Qian everything she knew. When it was almost time for the evening self-study session, she couldn't help but laugh. I laughed so hard that I almost choked on my rice. Does it mean that her grades are better than yours just because you didn't come back for exams? Ayaya, I want to laugh again. Why is she so awkward? If you have the time to make fun of others, why don't you spend more time on your own revision? The midterm exams on the 3rd and 4th, do you think you can do it? Yi Qian flicked her forehead with her finger and entered the classroom with a pile of books. There was another round of cheers when they arrived at the classroom. Zhao Hai and a few other students with good grades waited for Yi Qian to sit down and surrounded him. They were all very concerned about Yi Qian's family. After talking about their families, they started to talk about their studies. When the midterm exam was mentioned, everyone looked a little nervous. Zhao Hai said, I heard that a few universities have come to our provincial number 1 high school to scout us out. The results of the second-year midterm and midterm exams will be used as a reference for direct enrollment. The school is taking it very seriously this time. Teacher Tong even said that our class will be the key class of several key universities. You suddenly took 11 days off and learned a lot of new knowledge. Yi Qian, you have to hurry up and revise. Another boy said, take out your math, physics, and chemistry textbooks. I'll draw them for you. There are still a few days left, so hurry up and revise. Don't miss out on important matters. Direct enrollment from several key universities. Which ones? Yi Qian handed the textbooks to the boy and frowned slightly. Is the news reliable? How will the 3rd year's class react? They should be the focus of attention now. Zhao Hai smiled and proudly said, the first high school is the number 1 school in the province. Every year, a few important schools will come to the school at this time to inspect the 3rd-year students and 2nd-year students. Class 1 of liberal arts and Class 1 of science are always the focus of attention. Every year, there are students who are directly admitted to the provincial first high school for the college entrance examination, and there are also students who pass with high scores. In short, we have more opportunities than other schools. Why would parents choose a famous school for their children? It was not only because the school had a strong teaching staff, but also because there were many more choices. Yi Qian paused for a moment before asking, do you know which schools are coming? Which schools are you guys interested in? In his previous life, Yi Qian did not attend high school. In this life, he had only been in high school for less than 2 months. Therefore, he did not know much about the college entrance examination and enrollment. It was not too late to do so now. I don't know yet. The school only revealed some small news, and Teacher Tong didn't say much. Yi Qian, which school do you prefer? She only had one school in mind. She smiled and said, I'm afraid you guys won't believe me. If it was Hua University or Shi University, I wouldn't choose. I don't have any other schools either. Yi Qian raised a slender finger and said slowly, I only have one goal in high school. One school. I really haven't considered other schools. Mengwen hoped that she would not take the midterm exams. It was probably related to the direct enrollment for the college entrance examination. Chapter 1003. When Teacher Tong came in, Zhao Hai and the other students with good grades were still in shock. Yi Qian actually said that Tsinghua University and Shi University were not her choices. Then what school would she choose? Study abroad? No. Yi Qian said that she would not study abroad. This could be denied. Then what other school could there be? On the day she returned to China, Yi Qian called Teacher Tong and told her that she would come to school today. When Teacher Tong walked into the classroom, she saw Yi Qian sitting upright in the classroom. She glanced at her briefly and talked about the midterm exam. Just as Zhao Hai and the others had said, this exam would be used as a reference for the direct enrollment. Every student had to take it seriously and strive for good grades. Yi Qian did not feel much pressure. After Teacher Tong finished speaking, she buried her head in her revision. Although she did not want to apply to Tsinghua University or Shi University, the college entrance exam was still unavoidable. Time passed too quickly. She had to seize the opportunity. At night, after she explained the topic to Enjussin and the others, Yi Qian quietly left the dormitory after the lights were turned off. She wanted to see Principal Chen and plan her training for the next 2 years. In the face of war and seeing the civilians living in it, Yi Qian reflected on herself and put it into practice when she returned home. Since she said that she wanted to strengthen her training, she must strengthen her training. Principal Chen did not sleep. He quietly waited for Yi Qian to come over. "You've lost weight." The first thing Principal Chen said when he saw Yi Qian was that she had lost weight. If she did not eat and sleep well for 11 days, she would lose weight. After looking at her for a while, Principal Chen smiled and said, "You look more like a soldier. As for your eyes, they're sharper. Not bad. You look more like a soldier now." In order to nurture Yi Qian, Principal Chen had been living in the teacher's dormitory. It was a single room that was less than 30 square meters. But to him, he could live anywhere as long as he had a place to sleep. He was not picky. Yi Qian took out 2 cups and poured tea for Qin Shao and a cup of water for himself. He smiled and said, "Principal Chen, I've learned a lot this time, so I want to discuss something with you." The moment he came back, he was already discussing something, and he seemed to be in a hurry. This made the world-class sniper laugh out loud. Come. What do you want to discuss? Why are you so anxious when you just came back? I'm afraid it's not an ordinary matter. It just so happened that he also had something to ask Yi Wanwan about her relationship with Captain Xia. You know me best. I want to discuss the training with you. Yi Qian took a small sip of the steaming hot water and told him her plan. Her expression was cold and determined as she said, "I want to enter the purgatory training in advance." What do you think? Just from the name of the purgatory training, one could tell what kind of training it was. It was a training where no one gave you any encouragement. You could only rely on yourself and silently encourage yourself to move forward. During the training, you had to endure a huge amount of physical and mental pressure to improve your physical and mental fitness. 4 years of training. This training should only be carried out next year. Principal Chen looked sharply at Yi Qian and said in a deep voice, "Girl, you have to know that once my training mode starts, it will not stop. Are you sure you want to undergo 2 years of purgatory training?" "I'm very sure, Uncle Chin." Yi Qian nodded firmly. Not only did he not back down, but his eyes even had a hint of excitement for the upcoming training. "Uncle Chen, I'm completely sure that I can enter the next round of training." Chapter 1004. There was some silence in the room. Principal Chen narrowed his eyes slightly as he sat in the chair in front of the desk. After some time, he nodded. "All right, I see that you're ready. You can start training in advance. Rest well for the next few days and prepare for the midterm exams. We'll start right after the exams. Train until 11:30 every night. You're still young, so you have to make sure you get enough sleep." Yi Qian smiled. "I'll be careful. I'll have to trouble you again from now on, Uncle Chin." Ha, silly girl. My trouble will be much easier than your purgatory training. Enjoy your last few nights of leisure. You'll have to suffer from the night of the 5th. The purgatory training was divided into 3 parts. From 7:00 p.m. to 11:00 p.m., the focus was on physical training and skill training. Friday night to Sunday was survival training. This time, Yi Qian was obviously weaker than the members of the Snowfield Brigade in terms of physical fitness. They could march for dozens of hours at night without stopping. They could also maintain a high level of vigilance and detect abnormal situations. They could quickly formulate a battle plan within a few seconds. This kind of reaction and physical fitness was based on physical training and skill training. It could only be achieved through professional and systematic training. Yi Qian also had physical and skill training in the early stages, but it was all within the normal range and not training to challenge one's limits. The purgatory training was all about challenging one's limits. In the past, one could reach the standard with 8 or 10 points. But now, the purgatory training required 12 or 15 points. In the past, Yi Qian used to be able to complete the sniping in 5 minutes with his bare hands. Now, Yi Qian had to be able to complete the sniping in 20 minutes with his bare hands. This was the purgatory training. Since Yi Qian's goal was to join the Snowfield Brigade, he had to build a good foundation before he could get closer to his goal. The wound on his arm had healed after 11 days, but it hadn't healed enough to form a scab. It should be fine by the 5th. Yi Qian didn't mention his situation to Principal Qin, and Principal Qin didn't ask either. Instead, he drafted a training plan. The black pen scribbled on the white paper. Principal Chen's gaze was cold as he said, "If you want to join the Special Forces, you won't be able to snipe alone. You have to develop in all aspects. Take Captain Xia for example. He's known as the all-around soldier king in the army. I heard from Commander Liu that he's extremely talented in explosives, reconnaissance, electronics, and commanding. In terms of shooting, he's even better than the entire army. Even one of Commander Liu's Gun King veterans couldn't beat him. He has talent, and your talent isn't bad either. If you set him as your goal, girl, you really have a lot to learn." Yi Qian, who had been watching Principal Qin draft the training plan, was caught off guard when he heard this. He choked on the water in his mouth and coughed. This caused Principal Qin to stop writing. He laughed out loud and said, "Girl, why are you so nervous? What, you think I don't know? Ha ha ha, that would be troublesome. I know everything that's going on between you and Captain Xia. I even talked to Commander-in-Chief Xia on the phone and discussed your future development with Captain Xia." Yi Qian choked and coughed even harder. Uncle Qin even talked to Commander-in-Chief Xia on the phone and discussed his future development with Captain Xia. He looked up and stuttered, "You. How did you know? I didn't tell you. Commander-in-Chief Xia called you to tell you." Chapter 1005. Even if you didn't tell me, someone else would. I was also quite surprised that Commander-in-Chief Xia called me, but I was even more surprised that he actually approved of it. Principal Qin still felt a little incredulous at the mention of his call with Commander-in-Chief Xia. That year in the No Man's Land, he knew that Captain Xia was interested in Yi, so he deliberately mentioned family Xia and mentioned that their family backgrounds were not compatible. He vaguely implied that Commander-in-Chief Xia would most likely not approve of his son falling in love with a helpless female soldier. Who knew that, not only did Commander-in-Chief Xia not object, he was even happy to see it happen. He even discussed with him not to stop the two young people from getting together and to let nature take its course. Yi Qian calmed herself down and took a big gulp of warm water. She cleared her throat and said, "Captain Xia and I are indeed getting along now, but I also told him about our relationship. The real confirmation will have to wait until after we graduate from high school. I also met Commander-in-Chief Xia. He participated in our big review on the last day of military training. I took his car back. About Captain Xia and I." Yi Qian's expression was extremely unnatural under Principal Chen's teasing smile. She braced herself and continued, "Commander-in-Chief said that he didn't object, but I had to be careful. After all, I'm still young." She blushed as she spoke. It was as if she was caught in the act by an adult when she was secretly dating. She was at a loss of what to do. Principal Chen laughed, but he still had to talk about business. Ever since he received the call from Commander-in-Chief Xia, he had been thinking about finding an opportunity to ask. Now that Yi Qian came up to him and brought up the topic herself, it saved him a lot of trouble. Captain Xia is interested in you. I knew about it during the last training in the No Man's Land. He didn't hide it from me at that time. He even said that he is definitely a man worthy of you. Moreover, he is a soldier who has fought for the glory of the country all his life. I didn't agree at first, but when I heard this, I chose to wait and see for now. Now, it seemed that Captain Xia was indeed a responsible man and an excellent soldier. Uncle Jen and I can rest assured that you will be with him. Yi Qian was dumbfounded. Xia Jinyuan had revealed his thoughts to Uncle Qin in the No Man's Land. No wonder he said that Uncle Qin would definitely not object. He had mentioned it long ago. He's indeed an excellent soldier. I've learned a lot from him, and I've learned a lot. Yi Qian also had a very high opinion of Captain Xia. He was a soldier who had fought for the glory of his country all his life. This was the kind of soldier he was. It's precisely because he's so outstanding, little girl Yi. Principal Chen raised his head, the smile on his face receding slightly. His expression was solemn as he said, "It's precisely because of this that you should work even harder. Don't work hard for him, work hard for yourself. He is a man who is compatible with you, and you are a woman who is compatible with him. You don't need to depend on him to survive, and you don't need to depend on his light to survive. You have your own limelight, and you rely on your own abilities to stand out in the world. You don't need to rely on anyone else. This is what I hope for, little girl Yi." Xia Jinyuan's light was too bright. If little girl Yi didn't want to be overshadowed by his light, she had to work even harder. The two of them were like two stars in the sky. There was no need for one to rely on the other. They both had their own starlight. Don't worry. Whether I'm with Captain Xia or not, I'm still Yi Qian. I don't need to rely on someone else's Yi Qian. She was still herself. She wouldn't change just because she had a prominent boyfriend, and she definitely wouldn't stop moving forward. Chapter 1006. Principal Chen saw that her eyes were clear and bright, and that she did not have any intention of neglecting anything, so he was relieved. He patted her shoulder and said seriously, "Good girl, people must remember their original intentions, and they must not lose sight of their goals. Make sure that you have a pure heart, and bravely pursue your dreams and achieve your goals. That kind of life is a real life, and your life will be even more magnificent. I know what you're doing, so I won't say much. Let's talk about the training. I watched a drill a few days ago, and it gave me a huge shock. The current army is not the same as the army I was in back then, and the deployment and use of snipers is also very different. From private matters to training, the old man and the young girl's expressions changed at the same time. Their eyes were cold, and their expressions were slightly cold. They began to discuss the content of the training. For example, in the mechanized infantry unit, a mechanized infantry battalion is assigned a sniper squad, and the deployment is decided by the battalion commander according to the specific situation such as the mission, the enemy, the terrain, and the time. The sniper squad and the battalion is a combat unit that is quite opposite to each other. It is made up of 2 or 3 sniper squads and a squad leader. This is different from before. We used to have a sniper and an observer, and sometimes we didn't even have an observer. Just from this point alone, you can see that the reform of our army is quite big. I used to train you to fight alone, but it seems like I have to teach you about team combat in the future. In the army, you are not an individual, but a team. Soldiers in a team can fight together, and when necessary, you can fight alone. Principal Chen told Yi Qian everything he saw in the drill over the past few days so that Yi Qian could better understand the sniper combat of the entire army. I also saw that the snipers will have military all-terrain vehicles. The front and back of this vehicle can carry weapon systems, fuel, water, food, communication equipment, and personal combat equipment. It can be seen that the snipers the army needs now are not just soldiers responsible for sniping, but also to provide more useful information for the rear troops. Yi Qian did not know any of this. It was only through Principal Chen's analysis that she came up with a concept. From today onwards, Yi Qian would no longer limit herself to a sniper who only held a sniper rifle and went into battle alone. Instead, she began to develop the concept of an information-based sniper. Just from one exercise, Principal Chen had analyzed that all the troops of their country had already begun to use the information-based combat method. It was completely different from those countries that did not even have their own fighter jets and were militarily backward. A great country had risen. From returning to school to preparing for the midterm exams, Yi Qian attended classes during the day and studied at night. In less than one night, he had reviewed all the new lessons from the past 11 days. She had already finished her self-study, and revising again was just to consolidate her knowledge. The learning atmosphere in the class was quite tense. In order to obtain the direct enrollment quota, everyone was fully immersed in the midterm exam. The grade 12 students were even more nervous. They were going to take the college entrance exam next year. If they could be directly enrolled, it would not be as stressful for the grade 12 students. The intense revision of the grade 12 and grade 12 classes actually made the school much quieter for the first 3 days of the midterm exam. The exam started on the third of the day. And Jesin's eyelid kept twitching. Before the exam started, she said to Yi Qian, "I think I'm going to do badly this time. My left eye keeps twitching." Chapter 1007. Yi Qian held her face and teased her seriously, "It's too late to think that you'll do badly. If you really don't do well, uncle and auntie will think it's normal. If you do well, I think they'll think it's abnormal." "That's true. Ha ha ha, I didn't sleep well last night. I had a dream that I was looking for a pen during the exam. I was so scared that I woke up." And Jesin was relieved by Yi Qian's comforting words. She quickly said, "Don't tell me you really didn't bring a pen." "Let me see," opening the stationery bag, and Jesin's mouth twitched as she said, "I really didn't bring a pen. Not bad. You'll have no problem taking the exam. There's only 15 minutes left. You can go back and find a pen." Yi Qian looked at the time and reminded her slowly, "I'll give you 7 minutes and 30 seconds. That's enough time." And Jesin ran away. She didn't dare to stay. Not bringing a pen during the exam. She was really generous. There were still 5 minutes left before the exam. And Jesin ran back to the classroom, panting. She didn't go back to her seat. Instead, she ran to Yi Qian's side. Panting, she said, "I thought I was the only one who didn't bring a pen. Yao Jing was the same. I bumped into her when I went upstairs. She even dragged me to talk to her." Yao Jing, a name that he hadn't heard for a long time. Yi Qian also realized that he hadn't heard her announcements in school for the past few days. "Don't think that other people are like you, forgetting to bring a pen. Maybe they walk slower. Go back to your seat. The exam is about to start." Yi Qian didn't have much interest in Yao Jing. He gestured for Jesin to return to her seat and prepare for the exam. The first exam in the morning was from 8 to 10 in the morning. Students from year 1 to year 3 would be taking the mathematics exam. The exam papers would be given out 3 minutes in advance. As the bell rang, the entire campus fell silent. One could even hear the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Yi Qian was famous for his quick answers. The teachers in the school had also heard of him. At this time, the teachers in each class were swapping invigilators. 2 invigilators took turns standing in front of Yi Qian. When he was filling in the blanks, the teachers watching at the side were dumbfounded. He didn't even need to use a piece of draft paper. He just kept writing. While others had only done 1 dish, she had already done 3 or 4. With this speed, she could finish the 2-hour exam in less than an hour. After standing there for 10 minutes, the teacher rubbed his face and left. Standing in front of such a student, even a teacher would feel a little sad. The pressure was so great. The other teacher did the same. After standing there for about 10 minutes, he walked away silently. The pressure was extraordinarily great. Being a teacher was not as fast as being a student. When he saw the questions, he had to draw and write in his palm. As a student, he would just take a pen and calculate from the beginning to the end. The entire process was mental calculation. There was no paper. Yi Qian had always been good at mental arithmetic. Otherwise, how could he have won the individual gold medal in the mathematical Olympiad? At around 9:10 a.m., Yi Qian had already closed her test paper and was about to leave. Outside, the 2 unfamiliar teachers who had been keeping an eye on Yi Qian could not help but secretly nod their heads when they saw this. They said to Principal Chow, "Principal Chow, when her midterm exam results are out, we'll have to trouble you to keep an eye on her." "No rush, no rush. There are still 3 days before the exam. The 2 of you can keep an eye on other students." Principal Chow, who was accompanying the 2 Western University admissions teachers, was playing Tai Chi. Yi Qian did not even need the admissions teachers to keep an eye on her. When the results were out, many schools would fight to get her. However, Old Chen had already reminded him that Tsinghua University and Western University would not be Yi Qian's choice. Chapter 1008. When the teacher from the admissions office of Western University heard this, he smiled and said, "Nannan No. 1 Middle School has always been full of talents. 2 of the exchange students that our school selected to go to the United States graduated from Nannan No. 1 Middle School." The relationship between Western University and Nannan No. 1 Middle School is not ordinary. If there are good top students, President Chow, you have to tell us in advance. The relationship between West University and Southern Province First High School was indeed close. Almost all the top scorers in science had chosen West University. At 9:12, Yi Qian handed in her paper and came out. Principal Chow, who was waiting outside, waved at her. "Yi Qian, come here for a moment." Upstairs, there was the sound of running footsteps, followed by a girl's shrill and frightened voice, "Jingjing, where are you going?" Such a loud voice suddenly rang out in the quiet exam time. The students upstairs and downstairs could all hear it. Naturally, Yi Qian and Principal Chow also heard it. The second-year student sitting by the window paused and glanced outside. "Close the classroom door. Don't disturb the student's exam." Principal Chow was the first to remind the invigilator of Year 2 Class 1. He then personally closed the classroom door and turned to Yi Qian and said, "There's still 50 minutes left. Why don't you go back to the dormitory and rest for a while? You shouldn't have handed in your papers so early on such a cold day. It's much warmer to sit in the classroom." Before Yi Qian could answer, the commotion upstairs grew louder. A teacher's panicked voice could be heard, "Quick, go find the principal. Something happened to a girl in grade 12 class 6. Quick. Something happened to the girls in grade 12 class 6. Principal Chow didn't have time to talk to Yi Qian. Even the 2 admissions teachers from West University hurriedly said, "Excuse me, and hurriedly left. When something happened to a student, the teachers in charge of the admissions office of West University all changed their expressions. How could they still have the mood to go to other classes to take a look? They all chased after Principal Chow. Yi Qian furrowed his brows. The girl who screamed was Wang Dandan, and the Jing Jing she mentioned was Yao Jing. Something happened to Yao Jing. Would something happen to her? What could have happened to her? Class 1 was on the 4th floor, Class 6 was on the 5th floor, and Class 3 was on the 6th floor. Yao Jing didn't rush downstairs, but went upstairs instead, to find Yang Heng. Instead of focusing on the exam, he rushed to the 6th floor to look for Yang Heng. Yi Qian thought to himself as he went downstairs. He raised his head thoughtfully and looked up through the gap in the stairs. Something's not right. When they were about to reach the 4th floor, they heard Wang Dandan's shrill voice, "Jing Jing, come back quickly. Don't scare me, come back quickly. Come back quickly." Hearing this, Yi Qian, who was heading downstairs, stopped abruptly, turned around, and ran upstairs. When she reached the 5th floor, she saw the form teacher of Class 6 stumbling down the stairs in a panic. She was so flustered that she missed a step and fell forward. "Don't worry, be careful not to fall." Yi Qian, who had sharp eyes and nimble hands, rushed over and supported the teacher. "What happened up there? Is there anything I can do to help?" Yi Qian supported her in time, but the form teacher of Class 6 still sprained her ankle in her high heels. She gritted her teeth and walked down the stairs. "It's Yi Qian, quick, help me get Yang Heng out of Class 1. Tell him that something happened to Yao Jing and ask him to come over." Something big had indeed happened, and it wasn't just an ordinary thing. Yao Jing sat on the edge of the rooftop of the teaching building with her feet dangling outside. She swayed from time to time as if she was admiring the scenery. Wang Dandan was so scared that she fell to the ground and cried. She stammered, I don't know. She suddenly told me that she wanted to go up to the rooftop and asked me to find Yang Heng. Otherwise, she would jump off the building. Chapter 1009. Wang Dandan was in a daze. She was so shocked that she couldn't continue speaking and even bit her own tongue. I don't know what happened. I was in the middle of the exam and didn't even finish the questions when Jing Jing suddenly came over and snatched my exam paper. I don't even know what happened. Wang Dandan, who was paralyzed, was really frightened. Her face was so pale that her lips were trembling. She was sweating profusely, and her bangs were drenched in sweat. Her forehead was sticking to her forehead. She was still at a loss. Seeing her so frightened, Principal Chow knew he couldn't get anything out of her, so he got the invigilator to help her to the side. Help her to the side and get her a cup of warm water. Principal, let Yang Heng come up. Grade 12 Class 1's Yang Heng. Let him come up. He'll definitely have a way to persuade Jing Jing. Jing Jing is doing this for him. Please let Yang Heng come up quickly. Although her good friend Wang Dandan didn't agree with Yao Jing's way of doing things, she had never said anything bad about her behind her back. Sometimes, she would even advise her appropriately. For example, Wang Dandan had always tried to persuade her to relax about Yi Qian and Yang Heng. Unfortunately, it was useless. Yao Jing seemed to have been possessed and didn't get the result she wanted. Ever since Yang Heng's birthday, she hadn't calmed down and let go of her pent-up anger. Not only did she not let go, but the more she thought about it, the more she felt that she wasn't wrong. Everything she did was because she liked Yang Heng. She just wanted Yang Heng to lead a good life. She just wanted to get Yang Heng's only attention. After giving so much, all she got was disgusting from Yang Heng. Why? How could Yang Heng call her disgusting after giving up so much? She gave up so much just to prevent him from being seduced by those students with ulterior motives. Didn't she know why they liked Yang Heng? Wasn't it because of Yang Heng's family background? He was good-looking, had a good family background, and was good at studying. Who wouldn't like him? They all liked him. No one disliked him. But that was exactly what they liked. Liking someone with ulterior motives was despicable. Unlike her, she only liked Yang Heng himself. From middle school to high school, she only liked Yang Heng. She liked him so much and wanted him to lead a good life. Yang Heng, Yang Heng. What makes you think she's disgusting? How was she not worthy of him? In what way was she inferior to Yi Qian, that wretched girl from the countryside? Yao Jing was humming songs one after another. They were all sung by Yang Heng's favorite celebrities from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Sometimes they were happy, sometimes they were sad. They were all tunes that Yang Heng would hum from time to time. She didn't look back. She placed her hands on the edge of the rooftop and looked up at the gray sky. The corners of her mouth were raised high, as if she was smiling, but her smile made people panic. Hearing these tunes, Wang Dandan's tears flowed down one after another. Her hands holding the cup were still trembling. She turned her head to look behind her from time to time. Why aren't they here yet? Why aren't they here yet? Why wasn't Yang Heng here yet? Was he not coming? Was he really going to leave him in the lurch? The parents of the students have already rushed over. The police have also sent people over. There were quite a few teachers on the rooftop as well. All of them stared at the troublemaking students with taut nerves. None of them dared to even breathe loudly. At this moment, all the teachers in the school were frightened by Yao Jing. None of them dared to act rashly, let alone speak loudly. Chapter 10:10. Is Yang Heng here yet? Hurry him up and ask him to calm the girl down. Principal Chow was also panicking. This was the first time in his 11 years as principal that a student wanted to jump off a building. Although he was panicking, he did not show it on his face. As the principal of a school, how could he be so careless? When Yang Heng arrived, he was called out by the teacher and Yi Qian before he could finish the 3 big questions on the math paper. Yao Jing wants to jump off a building. She wants to see you. That was all Yi Jian knew. As for the rest, she was equally confused. She didn't know what was wrong with Yao Jing that made her want to jump off a building in school. At 9:18 a.m., Yang Heng walked out of the classroom less than 5 minutes after Yao Jing climbed to the rooftop. Hearing this, his handsome face darkened and the corners of his mouth tightened. She really knows how to play. She even wants to jump off a building. Yi Qian, do you believe that she will jump off a building? This question. Yi Qian felt that it was not easy for her to answer. Would Yao Jing jump off a building? No, that was what she thought when she heard class success homeroom teacher. Yao Jing would not jump off a building. A self-centered person who enjoyed the envious gazes of others and who had such a strong desire to show off would never do such a thing that would hurt himself so easily. Yao Jing would definitely hurt others, but she would not let herself get hurt. She was such a girl. Would she believe that she would jump off a building? She would not believe it. However, Yi Qian could not say if she would jump off a building at this time. She pondered for a moment and said, whether she will jump or not, we have to know what she wants to do. She deliberately chose to go to the rooftop during an exam and not during class. From this point of view, Yao Jing's intention to jump off a building is not big. Choosing to jump during an exam could not only avoid being surrounded by the students, but also let the teachers know what she was doing. After forcing Yang Heng to come forward, Yang Heng would not be able to reject anything Yao Jing said in a situation where there were no students around. Because the teachers would definitely persuade Yang Heng to agree to everything she said. In order to prevent her from jumping off the building and the students from getting into trouble on campus, all the teachers would persuade Yang Heng to promise her everything. Yang Heng strode towards the rooftop, his eyes flashing with a trace of mockery. He whispered to Yi Qian, "That's right, I have to know what she's up to. You took more than 10 days off, but she didn't even try to jump off the building. The moment you came back for the exam, she tried to cause trouble. Yi Qian, I can tell you now that I didn't make it after I showed up. I even had to ask you to come up here. This is indeed possible." Yi Qian raised his eyebrows. He stopped at the staircase leading to the rooftop. "I won't appear for the time being. I'll wait for her to make her move." Yang Heng nodded. He took a few steps up the stairs and disappeared before Yi Qian's eyes. The weather in November had turned cold. When the wind blew, the chill crept into one's neck. The wind on the rooftop was very strong. Yang Heng, in his blue and white uniform, appeared on the rooftop, making the teachers feel as if they had seen their savior. Principal Chow was instructing the teachers to stay in the classroom after the math exam. When he saw Yang Heng, he immediately signaled him to go back. He had to give a few instructions. "Yang Heng, something happened to Yao Jing from grade 12 class 6. Go and persuade her, but don't agitate her. Do whatever she wants to say and do as she pleases. You have to wait until her parents arrive, understand?" Yang Heng. Standing in the small pavilion leading to the rooftop, Principal Chow calmly instructed, "You have to remember, you have to wait until her parents arrive." Chapter 10-11. I'll try my best. Yang Heng nodded as his handsome face darkened. "Don't worry, she won't jump off the building. Yao Jing, I know her. Won't jump off the building. What if she missed a step?" Principal Chow sighed. "It doesn't matter whether she will or not. It's dangerous to stand on the edge of the rooftop now. If she misses a step, it'll be too late." He patted Yang Heng's shoulder and said solemnly, "Yang Heng, it's up to you now. Before the police arrive and before there's a life cushion, you have to hold her steady. You have to hold her steady." "Okay, I'll try my best to delay it. Wait for Uncle Yao and the rest to arrive." Yang Heng's eyes darkened. If Uncle Yao and the rest were here, Yao Jing would have more support. There were more than 10 teachers on the rooftop, and 2 of them were 4 to 5 meters away from Yao Jing. They were trying their best to persuade her. "Yao Jing, no matter what you're sitting here for, you must think about your parents. Think about them. We can solve anything. As long as you tell us, we'll think of a way to solve it. Why must you joke with your life? All the students are very worried. Can you come down first? If there's anything, we can sit down and talk. Sit down and solve it together, okay?" Yao Jing turned her head and said to the teacher who was talking to her on the right, "I want Yang Heng to come up. Also, don't get too close. If you get too close, I'll panic. Who knows, I might accidentally fall down." She immediately turned her head to the left and saw the teachers approaching her. "I don't like teachers surrounding me like this. I have to stand up. If I stand up, you won't dare to come close to me." As he spoke, he really stood up. The teachers on the left and right were so shocked that they all stepped back. Sit, we'll leave. It was too scary. How could there be such a student? Even adults don't have the guts to jump off a building. Yao Jing stood up and extended one of her legs into the air. Her action scared all the teachers to the point that they almost had a heart attack. "Teacher, don't come any closer. Look, I just have to lift my leg and I'll go down. With one leg in the air, she smiled menacingly. I want to see Yongheng. I want to see him. Right away, right away. Yongheng is taking the exam. He is a senior high school student. You have to give him some time. Don't be agitated. He'll be here soon. I guarantee that he'll be here soon. Yao Jing, sit tight and don't move. Yongheng will be here soon. At this time, they could only go along with her. Their hearts were in their throats, and the teacher in their eyes did not dare to do so. Everyone opened their mouths to persuade her. I want to see him immediately. Are exams more important than my life? Is it more important than my life? I want to see him, now. Right away. She screamed, and her expression was so crazy that it made the hearts of the teachers tremble. They stared at her feet, afraid that she would fall down in her agitation. Yongheng, who rushed out of the rooftop, happened to hear this sentence. Seeing her with one foot in the air, his eyes instantly darkened. Standing was even more dangerous than sitting. Headmaster Chow was so frightened that layers of cold sweat appeared on his back. Yongheng, hurry up and persuade Jing Jing. She's been acting strangely for the past 10 days. That day when Yi Qian came back to school and saw you talking to her, even her expression changed. Wang Dandan grabbed Yongheng's sleeve and said with tears in her eyes. She placed all her hopes on Yongheng. She can jump, she really can jump. Chapter 10-12. Yongheng lowered his head to look at her. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly as he said softly, do you believe that she will jump? Yao Jing is not afraid of heights. Yao Jing was not afraid of heights. She sat on the rooftop of the school building with her hands on the edge. Her center of gravity was tilted backward. From this posture, it was obvious that she was secretly protecting herself. I don't know, but she is really in danger now. Yongheng, you can't leave her in the lurch. Wang Dandan said softly, her red and swollen eyes full of pleading. Yao Jing, she likes you too much. Yongheng pursed his lips and remained silent. When it came to Yao Jing, no matter what he did, she always had a way to force him to stand up. He walked out and said loudly, Yao Jing, I'm here now. Can we talk about it after you come down? Yao Jing, who was still in a frenzy a second ago, stopped yelling at the teacher when she heard the familiar voice. She smiled and said to Yongheng, who was still a distance away, Yongheng, why are you only here now? I was having an exam. Yongheng took a few steps forward. Although he had a feeling that Yao Jing would not jump down, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat when he saw the gloomy smile on her face. Wang Dandan said that you were looking for me. What is it that you have to say in such a way? Yao Jing retracted her foot and stood on the edge of the rooftop that was less than 15 centimeters away. She laughed and said, why do I have to say in such a way? Yongheng, how can you ask me? You have to ask yourself. Why are you asking me the same question? I'm like this because you forced me to. What did I force you to do? Yongheng was calmer than the teacher because he knew her well. His clean and handsome face was cold, and he didn't panic at all in the face of her questioning. Is there nothing else? If there is nothing else, I'm leaving. He turned and prepared to go back to the classroom. Yao Jing saw this and screamed crazily, Yongheng, you dare. You dare to leave. Try taking another step. The teacher saw her so agitated that her body was shaking. Almost at the same time, they said, don't go, don't go. Don't rush, don't rush. Yongheng, come back. Don't rush her. Go with her, you must go with her. The head teacher of class 6 sprained his ankle and did not dare to go to the infirmary. He stopped Yang Heng and said, "Yang Heng, the exam is not important now. Life is important. If something really happens to her in school, all of us will have to bear the consequences." Just as Yi Qian had guessed, all the teachers were advising Yang Heng to go along with Yao Jing and not be anxious with her. All the teachers tried to persuade her. Yao Jing's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness as she said again, "Yang Heng, you know best what kind of character I, Yao Jing, have. If I'm having a hard time, you won't have a good time either. I jumped down today because you forced me to my death. You and Yi Qian forced me to my death." Upon hearing Yi Qian's name, Yang Heng clenched his fists. He turned around and looked at her coldly. "What did we force you to do? What does your jumping have to do with me and Yi Qian?" Yang Heng. Seeing that Su Tao had no intention of going along with Yao Jing, Principal Chao said in a deep voice, "Why don't you soften your attitude? This isn't a small matter." Why was it related to Yi Qian again? Ever since the previous incident, Yi Qian and Yao Jing had no more conflicts in school. Why was it related to Yi Qian again?